Quick disclaimer, I am not an airship history expert, nor am I a historian or a teacher or a primary source. I'm just a casual fan of rigid airship history and want to do a little show on Twitch for some of the viewers who follow me for video game content to expose them to a lot of history that they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. So if you're interested, do your own research. I made a couple of mistakes. I edited in corrections in the video. So with that being said, on with the video, and please enjoy. So here we go. I'm kind of winging. I have a loose idea of what I'll be doing, but I'm going to be winging this to an extent. But I've done a lot more planning for this than I ever really thought I would. But I've done a lot of. I've done it just for my own personal reference, and also writing books that take place in like 1910s times. Especially when they have a steampunk slant to them. I do end up doing a lot of research. Now, the college I went to has two campuses. One of the campuses, there was a school of aviation attached to my college. It was part of my college's course of study was aviation. So one of my campuses was actually an active airport, but there were other classes there too. So I was taking like a biology class, or well, not a biology class, like a excuse me, what is that word? Like an ecology class or an environmental studies class, and outside the window they're just planes taking off and landing. And so in the library relating to those courses of study, there were lots of good books about aircraft history, including books about airships. Now, these are just a few of the books I've taken out. I no longer have access to these books. So that the book The Aeronauts, that is by L.T.C. Rault. And I actually did not realize, it didn't click in my head, L.T.C. Rault. Where have I heard that name before? It did not click in my head until actually about a month ago when I was starting to get ready for this video. I was like, wait, that book was L.T.C. Rault. I'll get back to who L.T.C. Rault is and his significance later. I'm going to tie it back in a way you're gonna find amusing. And yes, those are silver dollars holding on the pages. I'm exposing more of my interest. Now, one of the books I actually do have, this book here is called Why, I know it's inverted, excuse me. It's called Why Has America No Rigid Airships? This was written this was published in 1945 by the former president of Goodyear. And so, I'm going to read the first page. A study of the characteristics of large ocean-crossing rigid airships leading up to the question, why does America not use all three, the dirigible, the airplane, and the steamship, to provide this country with the best possible transportation system? And this first I'm going to read this first page real quick. It's just almost kind of mythical. You have an airship here, you have a boat, you have also a flying boat. And it's almost kind of mythical the way this reads, like you're reading almost a legend. Nature has pointed the way for man to use more than the surface of the world given to him. For animals do not merely walk on the ground, but burrow beneath its surface. Birds fly over water and land alike, use both as landing places, and fish swim under the surface of the water. So man has used trains and automobiles to move about over the land, subways to travel below its surface, steamships to sail on the surface of the water, and submarines to travel under it, and has created airplanes and airships to fly both over the land and the great stretches of ocean. So I'm not going to read a whole lot to you. I'm going to show off this photo here. Here we go. So this guy here, that's P.W. Litchfield, former president of Goodyear. This guy here with the cigar, that is Hugo Eckener. And Hugo Eckener was, he originally, well, we'll get into his history later. But this book also, so this is 1945, immediately after World War I. Correction, I meant to say after World War II, not after World War I. He was making a case for America to develop rigid airships, because only America really had large helium reserves to fly airships with, and the airplane technology, they had been transatlantic airplane passenger flights, using different islands as stopping points. But those the direct flights were barely possible, and even after World War II, World War II did push fixed-wing aircraft technology a lot faster in developing it for the war effort than it otherwise might have. But coming immediately after World War II, the capacity of fixed-wing aircraft was not quite where it was, where if we did have rigid airships in the U.S., we would have had the unique ability to fly them using helium, which I'll get into the history of that later on. And also, they would have been able to do things that airplanes could not do. And just very rapidly after World War II, that gap was filled up before there was really a chance for that to gain traction. Now, why I mentioned that he was the president of Goodyear, if you did not know, Goodyear was a major developer of airship technology in North America, and they also worked with Zeppelin in what was called the Goodyear Zeppelin Company between World War I and II to build large rigid airships that served as flying aircraft carriers for the Navy, and they're still one of the only real operators of lighter than air airships today. They fly. Everyone knows about the Goodyear blimp, even though technically the newest Goodyear blimps are technically not blimps. They are actually Zeppelins, which in a sense, which I'll explain later on. Now, this here is an original photograph of the construction of the USS Shenandoah. I know it's inverted because of my webcam here, but I will I'll pull that out later, and we'll go into the history of that. So we'll get rid of this book. So we'll be referring to them later. We'll be tying that in. Now, when you talk about rigid airships, the video is going to kind of explain some of this that we'll watch, or parts of. To a certain extent, I'm really watching the video more to tear apart the parts it gets wrong, more so than as information. But here we have to scale a Goodyear blimp with a large rigid airship. If just the sense of scale, the difference between them. And the background is the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin, probably one of the most successful passenger airships of all time, and the Goodyear blimp there is in the foreground, so it is actually even smaller than the So basically, the difference between a blimp is also sometimes called a pressure airship, where its envelope, the big egg-shaped part, is basically a giant balloon. If you were to take a giant needle and pop it, which is very difficult to do, it would lose its shape and release its lifting gas and crash. Whereas a rigid airship, it's not like a balloon. It is actually a rigid airframe which holds the shape of the ship and allows, a larger... The entire bottom section... there's a diagram I could have incorporated. I'm sorry I didn't, but it should be kind of apparent what's going on. Ironically, the video will include a diagram that kind of gives a sense of the interior of these ships. It is not just on a blimp. Only the small cabin slung beneath the envelope contains passenger and crew facilities. In a rigid airship, the cab in the front, or the gondola, or the control car, will contain the operating. It will contain the bridge where the pilot and co-pilot will be at. Also, it will contain a radio room for radio communications and navigation. It'll have a kitchen for cooking food for the passengers and crew, and there'll also be facilities throughout the entire lower part of the ship, in which they're staterooms for the crew, for the passengers. There'll be dining areas, drawing rooms, smoking rooms. Believe it or not, smoking rooms, and even in these hydrogen airships. The smoking rooms. Well, the smoking room were exclusively featured on the Hindenburg, and the smoking room was actually pressurized so that if there was a hydrogen leak, there was no way that the hydrogen could leak into the smoking room. All lighters, any toys that sparked, if you had a little toy car that produced sparks, anything like that would be confiscated and locked up upon boarding the ship. and there was a special chained down lighter that they would give you to use in the smoking room, which was like a pressure sealed little bar. And so that's if you understand the difference between a blimp and a Zeppelin. Well, a Zeppelin was a ship. Well, the rigid airship was pioneered by Ferdinand von Zeppelin. He observed the American Civil War, saw the Union Army's use of tethered balloons for surveillance and spying purposes and to observe battles, and he was really fascinated on how to weaponize this and make these balloons into steerable, useful ships. And his particular interest was developing this to enhance the military prowess of Germany. I won't get into the politics of it. I'm just saying what's going on. Now, there might be a little delay. Okay, now, that's just that background there. That is just the background. That is just the video that we're going to be watching later. Mostly just so I could tear apart all of the horrible mistakes they made. Now, if looking at the interior of one of these ships, like this here is the part of the interior of, I believe this is either the R100 or the R101. Those were British airships. I'll get into that later. So, like, almost hotel-like, accommodations. Like, these were how the super rich, you were, yeah, I was flying out, yeah, Serial Wars is, talking about, yeah, we're never gonna, yeah, only on board a floating cruise ship, but never in the air are we gonna see something quite like this. Now, there are some luxury equipped airliners of, the like Airbus and 747, like the large Airbus and the large Boeing models do have something's vaguely approaching this in terms of but nothing like this. And okay, we're gonna pull up another interior. This is the sort of sitting lounge of the airship Hindenburg. There was also a dining area that was equally well-equipped. There's sort of a second area that's kind of off to the right that we can't really see, which is where you'd be able to look out the windows. Gonna bring up another interior here. Now, this is another interior of one of the large British airships. I believe this was the R100. Now, I don't have it's a shame. I should have thought... Now, how the British did their airship interiors, they made it more obvious that the interior where the crew, where the guests, or the passengers were their cabins and their dining areas and sitting areas, was almost kind of a module that was sort of built into the bottom of the keel towards the center, and then the window, and it was kind of like an open area that was, when there's an excellent photo of, like, I think it was the R100 or R101, and where you can kind of see that when the ship is deflated and the gas cells aren't installed, you kind of see you're just kind of in this open area in this giant expanse of the interior of the ship. And so they just kind of had it so that you can peek out these windows. But it's kind of like, you can see the banister there, where you're kind of just peeking out over the side, almost over the frame of the ship and through these windows. Now, let's check out the interior. Well, let's bring up the Hindenburg interior again. And I won't be glossing over the more unfortunate. I won't shy away from the more unfortunate aspects of airships and their use in Germany in the pre-World War II era. Okay, so I just want to have, this is the menu on board the Hindenburg, or one of the menus. Breakfast, coffee, milk, cocoa, bread, butter, honey, preserves, eggs, boiled in cup, Frankfurt sausage, ham, salami, cheese, or fruit. So basically what would be called a continental breakfast. Now, what I remember is that, like, the Germans, the passengers, like to have their eggs soft, but for American passengers, you could choose to have your eggs scrambled or fried over hard. Dinner, beef broth with marrow dumplings, Rhine salmon a la Graf Zeppelin, roast gosling la Menuret. I don't even know how to say that. Me personally, the only time I've ever had soft eggs is in England, and it was quite an experience. It's only something. The way they cook their soft eggs is different from how they kind of soft eggs over here. But I know the British food is kind of infamous, but I do stand by a good British full breakfast. It will last me the entire day during the short time I've been in England. But mixed salad and applesauce, pears Concord. I don't even know what pears Concord is, with chocolate sauce, coffee and fresh fruit, supper, pâté à la Rhine, roast fillet of beef, mixed salad, cheese, fresh fruit, and coffee. So you were getting your money's worth, and you might want that. I've showed this menu, and some say I'll take that with a side of with a fire extinguisher on the side. But now let's so there's a bit of a delay from when I click these commands to when the images go away, so excuse me. So we're gonna make no crepes. There are no crepes on the menu. If the French developed their airship program a little further, I'm sure there would have been crepes on the menu if they had been doing transatlantic flights. Now, speaking of transatlantic flights, there are. I mean, I wanted to make a disclaimer. I'm not a historian. I'm just a hobbyist, casual guy, and so you could say that there were 9 rigid, transatlantic type rigid airships. There were certain Zeppelins there was one Zeppelin I know that I forgot the number offhand, but it was built by Germans with the intent of flying across the ocean and bombing New York City. That never happened. But of ships that were really, like, you could say that there are 9, like, transatlantic or transoceanic or transcontinental type rigid airships. And I am not including what was called the Africa ship in World War I, which was a plan by the Germans to resupply an ailing fleet in Africa somewhere, like a platoon in Africa, by sending a Zeppelin on a one-way trip with supplies and reinforcements and ammunition, then scrapping the Zeppelin once they got there, and then using all the materials that they scrapped to build more equipment for those troops. So it's funny because we think of like the airship era, as this big thing, but there are really only 9, arguably more, but some important airships. R-34, the first transatlantic flight, nonstop, which was the first flight from Europe to North America. The captain of the ship, upon the R-34's arrival in New York, R-34 was a British airship, by the way. It flew from England to Long Island. And that ship, the captain actually had to parachute out of the ship. And when he touched down in Mineola, New York, he became the first person to cross when he touched the ground, because he had to parachute out to teach the American ground crew how to properly bring in a Zeppelin, or an airship rather, because it's not a Zeppelin-built ship. It is a Zeppelin-style ship, which rigid airships are often colloquially called Zeppelins, but it is not a Zeppelin, a ship built by the Zeppelin company. So R-34, we have the USS Los Angeles, which was built as war reparations by the Zeppelin company in Germany. We'll get into the history in more detail later. You have the Graf Zeppelin, arguably the most successful and famous of all of the transatlantic rigid passenger airships. You have the R-100, which was I don't want to get into the deal too much. The R-100 and R-101, which were both built in Great Britain for Great Britain. Then we have the USS Akron and USS Macon, which were built in the U.S. as a joint venture between the Goodyear Company and the Zeppelin Company. These were built for the U.S. Navy. They were flying aircraft carriers. If you've seen the movie Up, where it's the airship is launching the biplane fighters, that's based on the USS Akron and Macon. You have the Hindenburg, which was built by the time the Hindenburg had been built. The Nazi Party was in control of Germany, and they used their airships for propaganda purposes. The airships were kind of the space shuttles of their day, which is kind of ironic because the space shuttle is now itself, they're all in museums now. Space shuttles themselves are, now an obsolete form of space travel, but they were the high, we think of them nostalgically, but they were the most high-tech thing of the day. So they were the perfect method for the Nazi Party to depict fascism as being, this is the more modern, high-tech way to run a society where, look how the innovations we're making in technology. So it's unfortunate. We'll get into that a little more later. There are other ships that could have been included in that, but that's just a brief overview of... Now I do need... Excuse me. That's the... Okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to do. I just want... Just awkward pause while I want that photo to go away. Now this here is the LZ-1, built in 1900 by... this was Count Zeppelin's first airship. He wanted to develop... He had this idea for a while. I forgot exactly. I knew in those books. I don't know offhand. It's not really easy to find this information online. There's still a lot of... When you get into serious research, there's still a lot of stuff you really need to go to physical ink and paper books for. But he really wanted to start building these ships earlier on. And there's airships often in popular culture are used to illustrate the fact that you're now in a world where technology went down a different path and maybe the airplane was never invented. But there's a world out there, if you believe in the multiple universes concept of quantum mechanics, where perhaps Count Zeppelin got his money maybe 10 or 20 years earlier. And airships had been so developed that by 1904, the Wright brothers really didn't have the motivation to try to build a fixed-wing aircraft if airships had been developed a little further. But we'll get into that later. Possible what-ifs and why airships didn't really catch on after the start, after the Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg. So this is LZ-1, the first airship. Oh, the first Zeppelin rigid airship. The first modern rigid airship as we'd come to know them. They were really kind of throwing things against the wall, seeing what worked. And they actually had a system of weights on pulleys that they would use to move back and forth below that lower keel to to change the weight of the ship. Because they really didn't know how it would handle, how the flight would go. And all these ships would, in fact, use hydrogen, which led to many disasters, but not as many as you might expect. So LZ-11. LZ-2, while we're talking about LZ-1, so the Zeppelin company early on was really strapped for funds. He was not able to build his first airship until 1900. He wanted to build one, at least a decade or more before that. I'm not sure. You have to look that up yourself, or rather, but it was LZ-2. Wasn't built until 1906. Between 1900 and 1906 was the amount of time it took for him to get the funds to build a second prototype airship. Hugo Eckener, I don't know if he was there for the launch of LZ-1, but Hugo Eckener, who I mentioned earlier, he actually was a reporter, and he went to see these test flights, these early Zeppelin test flights, basically to laugh at them, because he thought this was ridiculous. And Zeppelin actually, Count Zeppelin, talked to him and actually ended up sweet-talking him into becoming a supporter and enthusiast who was providing positive coverage when he actually went to write an article making fun of them. He ended up becoming kind of the Howard Hughes of the German airship industry. He ended up becoming so popular that when the Nazis took over, he was actually considered a favorite to run against Adolf Hitler and the Nazis because he was so popular and well-liked throughout Germany at that point. And when he worked with the Nazis to the extent that he had to in order to continue the airship program, but he was kind of known as the person that the Nazis wanted, the one person who was too popular for the Nazis to assassinate, and was known to say things against the party when he thought no one was listening. But so that's a little premature. We're still in pre-World War I right now. But LZ-2 was built in 1906. LZ-3 and LZ Luftschiff Zeppelin, so Airship Zeppelin, pretty much in English, so all the Zeppelins were named LZ and then the number of ships designed. The LZ number was by the number of ships designed, not the number actually built. which will come into importance later, as we'll see. Let me grab a swig of water. Okay. LZ-3, the third ship built, was the first that was considered by some to be a really successful aircraft, where the first two were kind of just experimenting with how to control and balance a ship. The third one was the first where they were really able to successfully, I guess, control it reliably. It ended up being bought by the German armed forces. German airships would be given a number starting with L, and there were actually games the German military would play. Now, here is the LZ-10 Schwaben. This was built in 1911. And you notice the pencil-like shape of the ship, not very aerodynamic, and the front and back gondolas contain the engines, which I believe were attached to the propellers on the sides by a chain system or a pulley system. And so that's where the operators and crew were. They had access to the lower keel of the ship, and in the center, that thing with the windows that looks kind of like they just sort of bolted a train car onto the underside of the ship, that is where the passengers would ride. And they would use wicker seats and furniture in the to save on weight. And inside was kind of just like a narrow train car where it was really, as I understand it, these early Zeppelins were really doing more sightseeing trips. But the Schwaben, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it properly. I don't speak or read the German language. But this is widely considered the first successful passenger aircraft, and for commercial purposes. And now there was a British newsreel produced during World War I, during the era where the Germans were doing Zeppelin air raids on British targets, including civilian targets during the war, to try to demoralize the public and to obviously actually, do damage. The airship was basically, it was a British propaganda film against the Germans, and they used footage of this ship, the Schwaben, to show, like, oh, the Germans are using airships to bomb civilian targets, those monsters, and, perhaps rightfully so. But they used footage of the Schwaben, which was never actually used in war. So they used whatever footage they had of German Zeppelins, regardless of whether or not the ship was actually used for war. Now, their ability to actually do the research and find that out, let alone the public's ability to learn that for themselves, was very limited back then. But they show them a launch of the Schwaben, and then they transcut it with later footage of a Zeppelin being shot down during World War I, or the Great War as it would then be known, and to imply that this was the ship that was shot down. This ship crashed with no fatalities, but it was destroyed. There were a number of ships that were destroyed with no fatalities. And actually, it was not until the Hindenburg disaster that civilian passengers were harmed or killed in a German Zeppelin flight. So they actually had a fantastic civilian safety record. Okay. Now, we're jumping to post-war here. So excuse me. But this is LZ-120, the Bodensee, or Bodensee. Basically, I believe that Bodensee is basically the local name for what we might call Lake Constance. This was one of the first aircraft, if not one of the first, to actually be tested in a wind tunnel for its design. As you see, we've gotten away from the more pencil-like shape of those earlier Zeppelins, and now we have this more aerodynamic shape. These Zeppelins have the entire passenger and crew accommodations in the front car, with the front being the bridge for the operations and the rear being for the passengers. And this was actually doing commuter passenger flights, competing with the railroads for traffic to and from Friedrichshafen, where the Zeppelins were based. My goal is to be entertaining, so I'm glad y'all are enjoying it. Now, we're going back to World War I era. This is LZ-62, the 62nd design ship, not necessarily the 62nd built. This is designated as L-30. Now, the German military was playing games where they would add, I think they, you know, that thing that you hear, that, you know, the urban legend, it probably actually happened at least, but it seems to have the stories of kids as a senior prank in high school releasing some chickens into the hallways to cause chaos, and they'd put numbered collars around the chickens' necks. It would say like 1, 2, and 4, so that all the teachers would still be looking for chicken number 3, and there was none. So the causing those were confused, or thinking that they hadn't caught all the chickens yet. The German military was kind of doing something like this, where they arbitrarily added 10 numbers to the number of, you know, this is L-30. They arbitrarily added that like 10 to the count to throw off the sense of how many ships they'd actually built. So, all right. Now we're getting into. So here is. Oh yeah, and also one. I guess more notes before I get into this ship here. I forgot to actually mention it. The reason I included this is the first of what were called the Super Zeppelins. This is where the Zeppelins begin to go from the pencil-like shape to something more aerodynamic. And as they're building these, they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. Now, the next ship I want to show off. Okay, this is R-34. This is not the first British ship, first British airship. This was part of what were called the R-33 class airships, of which there were only two, R-33 and R-34. They tended not to... The habit was not to give official names to these British airships, which was, I think, somewhat because they didn't want to give a name to something where it's an experimental vehicle and it might crash. They didn't want to name a ship after, you know, the reigning monarch and then it crashes, you know, or something, or name it after a nobleman who's still alive and then it crashes or something like that. It was part of maybe the motivation. This was built by Beardmore for the Royal Naval Air Service of Great Britain. This was the ship that made the crossing to North America. When was that? That was in 1919, I think. Major E.M. Pritchard was the one who became the first to fly to North America by air when he parachuted off the ship. This is actually depicting the landing of the ship in Mineola. But this is a military ship, and this is not the kind of ship that would have the accommodations that I was showing off earlier. This was really an experimental military scout ship. This wasn't something that was carrying paying passengers. And next we have the Roma. This was built in 1920. Here it is flying over New York City. This was an Italian airship that was designed by Umberto Nobile, who was in Italy. He was developing what were called semi-rigid airships, where it's kind of an in-between it has an internal structure, but the shape of it is still partially maintained by the pressure of the lifting gas. Now, Roma was purchased by the U.S. Army and was operated by the U.S. Army. It was inflated with hydrogen, as was standard practice at the time. The ship met with disaster when it crashed while attempting a landing, and what should have just been a crash that would have damaged the ship and caused repairs and possibly caused injuries resulted in total loss of the ship and loss of life, because it struck power lines, and if it was inflated with helium, that wouldn't have been a hazard. Well, it would have been a hazard, but because it was filled with hydrogen, the electric lines started a hydrogen fire, which led to the total loss of the ship. And it was at that point that the U.S. military decided that it was no longer going to use hydrogen to inflate airships under any circumstances. So, let me take a sip of water. And And so next, we are back to another American airship. Hey, Airship, to see you there in chat. This is the USS Shenandoah, which Azurest actually sent me Azurest actually was personally sent me this photo that they found in a thrift shop of the construction of the USS Shenandoah. Now you might notice the similarity of the Shenandoah to the what was called the Super Zeppelin there. This was actually constructed. The USS Shenandoah was built in the U.S. by the Navy, not the Army, but the Navy. It was based on the plans of a crashed U-class German Zeppelin. This specific one, I believe, that was shot down during World War I. And it came down relatively intact, so the Allies were able to salvage it and reverse engineer the plans to further their own rigid airship development. And so that's how we ended up with building the USS Shenandoah. The USS Shenandoah was destroyed in a storm. Now, we have a bit of a story about... There were several factors at why it was destroyed, but one of them is seen as one of the main factors, is that the U-class... that type of ship that I just showed the picture of when it crashed, at that point in World War I, believe it or not, it is not that easy to blow up a Zeppelin deliberately. I mean, in terms of like having, a machine gun in a biplane and shooting at it. Normal bullets you had to get lucky and have a bullet puncture the... Pure hydrogen doesn't burn. You need a hydrogen-oxygen mixture, as I understand it. And you need to have a spark. So you had to get lucky and have a bullet spark on the skeleton of the ship and have leaking exposed hydrogen to start a fire which would destroy the ship pretty much instantly. And you had stories of these planes shooting at the Zeppelins, getting clear shots on the envelope and not being able to shoot them down. And they would have machine guns mounted in the engine cars and on the roof of the Zeppelins to shoot, to return fire. So these were dangerous not just for the people on the ground. They were dangerous against airplanes as well. So the Allies developed ammunition that was capable, basically incendiary bullets, as I think they're called. I'm not a munitions expert, but that would be able to pierce the envelope of the ship and pierce the gas cells and start a hydrogen fire. So at this point, that's why you needed leaking hydrogen and a spark in order to start a fire, which I'll get into when we get into the Hindenburg. But, so the biplanes that the Allies were flying, as I understand, they could only fly so high, so the strategy was to build lightweight, structurally deficient, structurally weaker airships. But because of that shaved off weight from the skeleton and the frame, they'd be able to fly at higher altitudes where the planes could not reach them. The Allied enemy planes couldn't reach them. So the idea was, it's a weaker ship, a weaker airframe, but it'd be able to fly above turbulence and severe weather. And some of these ships were flying so high that the crew actually had to equip oxygen masks in order to breathe. So basically, the Allies were copying a deliberately structurally deficient design and didn't know why it was built that way. So they didn't know that. Well, they ended up the USS Shenandoah crashed in a storm that they theoretically could have flown above, or that this type of ship just wasn't designed to fly through, because they were kind of copying something they didn't understand. Now, I want to take a quick. I want to mute the music here. Okay. I want to tell you a quick story about copying something you don't understand. I finally have an excuse to show this on stream. This is a bagatelle table that I haven't given away yet. Oh, excuse me. I forgot to turn off chat, but yeah, he's talking. Serial was talking about you would experience. Airships were very smooth flying vehicles, but to get this off screen real quick. So this is a bagatelle table. This is the forerunner to pachinko, the forerunner to pinball, and I just bought this online. I really wasn't thinking, oh yeah, it's a bagatelle table. Like, you know, it's fine. What I didn't consider is if you look at an actual this is a cheap sort of really poorly made bagatelle table, and if you look at a properly made one, you'll notice that it has a smooth like curve as the ball goes up the chute into the play field, but this has this hard this hard angle here, so all the balls fly up, ricochet off that corner, and fly at a 90-degree angle. So it does not play well. It's good, okay, as a decorative item, but it's not a good game of bagatelle. And so that's just showing they copied the idea. They looked at a picture like this one I have on stream. They copied the idea of a bagatelle table, but didn't really understand what they were copying, and didn't understand why having this angle here would basically ruin the playability of the table. Now I can finally give that away to a thrift shop, because I do not want it in my apartment anymore. But we're gonna go back to so it's talking about copying. Just talking about copying the design and not really knowing what you're copying and the consequences of that. Another factor that is believed to have played into the crash of the Shenandoah was air pressure in the storm. Basically, I don't know exactly, and I haven't done the reading on it in a while, so I might have this kind of wrong, but the general gist of it, what I read, or what I've heard, is that they should have been trying to fly above the stormy weather, above the squall line. And to do that, they would have had to vent hydrogen. Because, take a submarine, for instance. Like, you know the idea of crush depth. The submarine's hull can only take so much weight. As you go lower and lower underwater, the weight of all the water in the ocean is pressing down on the submarine. So there's only so low you can go down before there's so much pressure that it crushes and destroys the submarine. You have the opposite thing with aircraft and balloons. With airships and balloons, where you have what's called pressure height, where right now at ground level, to really grossly illustrate this, all the pressure, the weight of all the air in the world is pushing down on, when you inflate a balloon, the weight of all the air in the world is pushing down on that balloon. So the higher you go up, there's less air above it. I mean, pretty gross, loosely speaking. And so because there's less air pressure, the balloon grows in size. So if you see a balloon raising higher and higher, the balloon starts to swell in size eventually to the point where the tension, like, it just pops because there's, as the pressure gets lower and lower, it inflates until it pops. So basically, as an airship goes very high up into the air, they have to vent helium or hydrogen, whatever the lifting gas is, in order to prevent the gas cells inside the ship from rupturing. And they didn't want to, they're very reluctant to vent helium because basically the USS Shenandoah had almost the entire US supply of helium inside it at the time. And they, at least certainly by the time the USS Los Angeles showed up, but we'll get into that. Go a little further down. No, excuse me, I have to find my spot. Where was I? Yes. So the next ship we're gonna mention, we're getting another Italian semi-rigid airship. We have the Norge. Here we go. So this is 1920. Oh, by the way, the USS Shenandoah was 1923. The Norge was also 1923. This was built and operated out of Italy. Was used to do a lot of famous Arctic exploration missions. And the Norge completed what is considered the first undisputed human exploration of the North Pole of the planet. The other claims were somewhat or disputed sometimes. Norge is the first undisputed time human beings visited the North Pole. So this is another semi-rigid design where there's an internal structure, but it's also somewhat maintained by the pressure of the lifting gas, which would have been hydrogen. Pretty much, United States had a exclusive monopoly on helium production. So 1923, you have the Norge. 1924, we have... Here it comes. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Here it comes. Ah, here we go. The LZ-126, which was constructed in Germany. It was constructed by the Zeppelin Company as war reparations to the United States. And the crew and Friedrichshafen, as they were building this, were pretty much building this, somewhat expecting this to potentially be the very last Zeppelin, very last airship that they ever got to build. So they put a lot of love and care into this, expecting it to potentially be the last Zeppelin ever built. When I was talking about before the LZ-120 Bodensee, that ship was confiscated under the Treaty of Versailles, and it had a sister ship which was given to Italy, and then the Bodensee was given to France. They were renamed. Bodensee was given to France, and Esperia was given to Italy. Esperia would have been, I believe, LZ-127? No, excuse me, LZ-120. LZ-121 was Esperia. LZ-122, 23, 24, and 25 were planned, I believe. I might have gotten one of those wrong. 20, okay, LZ 20, 21. 22, 23, 24, and 25 were planned and designed but never built because they were banned under the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was banned for building airships for any purpose, even civilian passenger purposes. They got special permission and were actually ordered to build LZ-126 as war reparations to the United States. And so this is... so actually when... This is the first Zeppelin-built ship to fly to North America, and it was flown, captained by Hugo Eckener personally. They tried to get insurance on the ship for the transatlantic flight and delivery to the United States so that they'd be able to recoup the money if the ship were to crash in flight over during the Western voyage. They could not get insurance, so they just went ahead and flew it, with no insurance, and they flew successfully, which was a big... I read stories of lots of crowds coming out to see the LZ-126 because a lot of Germans thought they'd never get to see another Zeppelin airship again. Now, the LZ-126 was, upon delivery to the U.S. Navy, was rechristened the USS Los Angeles, and under the Versailles Treaty, the USS Los Angeles, though it was built specifically for delivery to the U.S. Navy, was constructed with the specifications and equipment of a passenger civilian airship. The cabin the gondola at the front also contains the crew quarter, also contains the passenger quarters, which was kind of like a small train car like quarters. But didn't have the facilities of, like traveling in luxury over many, multiple day journeys, over a multi-day journey. So the passenger compartments were able to be converted into bunks for sleeping during the night. But for a transatlantic voyage, from what I have understood of what I've seen of the interior, it's not the comfiest ship for crossing the ocean in. For, maybe a day-long trip, it was probably more like what a trip like this would have been used for was the LZ-120, like the Bodensee, would have been used for like a 2 or 3 hour commuter flight within Germany, that to an extent, that kind of scale of operation. Now, because of the Versailles Treaty, or the limitations put on by the international community on basically because of the Germany's restrictions under the Versailles Treaty, they had to build the USS Los Angeles as a civilian passenger airship. And also, I believe the U.S. had to agree to not use the USS Los Angeles. They agreed not to equip it as a warship. And even for use in, war games or experimental fleet operations, non-aggression operation, just for like trial runs of how the ship could be used to launch gliders, or it could be used as a scout ship to facilitate a fleet of warships in the ocean. they actually had to obtain special permission from the international community to use the ship for what were called fleet problems or war games, and each use had to be specifically authorized, as I understood it. Yes, the USS Los Angeles was used to launch gliders and I believe possibly small biplanes, but it was never. It had no facilities to launch and accept parasite fighters. When gliders were launched, they were kind of just attached beneath it, using equipment that was added once the Navy took control of it. And so that's LZ-126, and LZ-127 here is the Graf Zeppelin. This is arguably the most successful and famous and groundbreaking of all the passenger airships, especially when it comes to the German Zeppelins. This was once again, this was kind of almost crowdfunded. They were selling commemorative stamps, pre-selling commemorative stamps to the public around the world to help fund the construction of the Graf Zeppelin. Also using money from the German government. And also, going back to those early pre-World War I ships, a lot of those ships were crowdfunded from the public because they didn't have enough money. So people were like just sending money in the mail to the Zeppelin company from across Germany to help build these ships, which they hope would, enhance the prestige and power of the German country. But the Graf Zeppelin was really a big major breakthrough. They would have built the Graf Zeppelin, as I understand it, a little bigger, but they were limited by the size of the hangar they had to build it in. The gondola at the front does contain both the crew. Well, I mean, there's crew quarters throughout the entire keel of the ship. There's also access to the center, like the sort of what they call the axial corridor, I believe, in the center of the ship. And there are also passages to go up to the roof through the middle of the ship, only for crew. So there's like the crew bunks and like the officers' mess and officers' quarters are within the envelope of the ship, but within the gondola are the communications room, the bridge for operating the ship, the dining room, and the cabins for the passengers. And this ship completed the famous round the world, circumnavigating the world. They, visited. Well, they actually started technically the flight started from Germany, but for publicity purposes, since it was being funded from, with American money, this publicity trip. So they flew to Germany, and then they flew from Germany to New York, and from New York they flew back to Germany, and then they flew over Russia. They landed in Japan. There's a really thrilling book written about the round-the-world voyage of the Graf Zeppelin. If you've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there's that famous scene where Indy he dresses up as a crew member of a fictional Zeppelin that many people infer to be the Hindenburg, but it's actually just a fictional ship. I think they just call it L3 or something generic like that. And there's an SS guy is hunting for Indy, and he sees him in the crew, the airship crew getup, and he throws the SS guy out the window, and all the passengers are staring at him. He's like, "Oh, well," he's like, "No ticket." They all freak out to get out their tickets before he throws them out the ship. Well, they actually, on the round the world flight of the Graf Zeppelin, they did weight, the weight of the passengers and their luggage was strictly controlled, and so if stowaways were found aboard the Graf Zeppelin, they did have a pair of parachutes, in which case, if the stowaways were discovered, they would have been chucked out of the ship with their parachutes. So, no ticket actually has some historical basis in reality. I just want to just wipe my brow a bit, because I don't have my fan on, so it's a little hot in here. Hugo Eckener was the captain for the round the world flight. He was said to Hugo Eckener has a background in sailing, so he had an uncanny sense of being able to accurately predict the weather and the wind. And there were times where people say, oh, I want to go on a pleasure flight on a airship today, and they had it planned, and he'd go, and he's like, nope, flight's canceled. There's gonna be a storm later, and it was blue skies as far as the eye could see. People are like, what are you doing? Of course it's not gonna. And then could predict the weather with almost, they say, uncanny accuracy. And if it was not a good day to fly, you listened to what Mr. Eckner had to say. But he would very strictly control, like, there was I read one of the books I showed you earlier, was a story of one of the passengers wanting to bring aboard a small hand-cranked phonograph player and some records, and Hugo Eckner, like, they had to argue with him. He was passionate, like, you are not bringing that record player on board. Like, he had the weight calculated to the gram that could be brought aboard for this round-the-world flight. Now, speaking of weight, this ship was unique, the Graf Zeppelin, in the use of what was called blow gas as a fuel for the engines. Now, when you have gasoline or petrol or diesel oil as your fuel for the engines, you have a bit of a conundrum, because as you burn fuel throughout the flight, the ship is becoming lighter and lighter as you burn more of the fuel oil. So there was a problem where they pretty much... so the one solution they came up with for the Graf Zeppelin was the use of a gas as the combustible gas as the fuel source, called blow gas after its inventor. And so by using this gas, as more and more of the fuel was used up, the buoyancy and the weight of the ship didn't change. So so that's the Graf Zeppelin. And next we have... so that's 1928 is the Graf Zeppelin LZ-126. No, actually, excuse me, LZ-127. Excuse me. What am I doing? Yeah, Graf Zeppelin's LZ-127. What am I thinking? I need to... And so a lot of the stuff isn't from notes. I do have some notes up. So, so in 1929, we have the R100. This is a British airship built by the Vickers Company. There were two airships sort of built in a pair. The R100, which was built by Vickers, and another... there was also the R101, which was built by the Royal... Yeah, it was built by the Royal Aircraft Works. So R100 was built by a private company on behalf of the government, and R101 was built by the government itself. R100 made a successful flight to Canada, and R101 was said to be structurally deficient and of a poor design in many aspects. Was said to, on its final flight, to have been overloaded, perhaps, with unnecessary items. I won't get into it. I don't know the history offhand, but the R101, some say that even the crew even knew it wasn't as strong a ship as the R100, but they had to fly in order to not be shown up by the R100, because the two teams were in competition with each other, because this was part of a scheme to develop airship lines from the island of Great Britain to far-off parts of the British Empire. And R100 crashed in France on the way to India. R101, not R100. R101 crashed with massive loss of life on the way to India. And on board the R101 were pretty much most of the proponents and engineers behind the British airship program. So the crash of the R101 pretty much ended the British airship program. Alright. So, now, where is... Okay, so next, we've got the, so that was 1929 R100. Next, Keystone ship I'm going to point out is the USS Akron, which was built as a joint effort between the Goodyear Company and the Zeppelin Company. Therefore, we have the company, the Goodyear Zeppelin Company, or Corporation, I forgot the exact name. So, joint venture between Goodyear and Zeppelin. And P.W. Litchfield was involved in that, and therefore that's why he wanted to continue rigid airship development after World War I. Now...
Correction, I meant to say after World War II, not after World War I.
USS Akron, 1931, built by, a joint venture between Goodyear and Zeppelin, built for the U.S. Navy as a flying aircraft carrier, and I'll get into what that means as specific. Now, this was the when you have the USS Shenandoah. Actually, something important. I skipped this with the USS the USS Los Angeles. When the USS Angeles arrived from Germany, they actually had to deflate the USS Shenandoah because our helium reserves were so scarce that we didn't have enough helium to fill 2 airships at first. So they actually deflated the USS Shenandoah in order to inflate the USS Los Angeles until there was enough helium available for both ships. Something else I want to point out real quick about the R100. And, okay, I have to make the photo of the Akron go away. I'm doing all this in my broadcast software. That ship at in the background on the lower, that is actually the Graf Zeppelin. So you have the R100 from Britain and the Graf Zeppelin from Germany in the same shot there. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, the stripes above the engines on this ship, and as well as the USS Macon, what those are water reclaiming devices to sort of reclaim moisture, pretty much. I mean, that's explained. So it's not a paint job thing. Those are actually devices to aid in the operation of the ship. Now, you notice, we'll take a closer look at this, but this is the first Zeppelin type ship built specifically. I mean, USS Shenandoah, they always planned to use helium, but they were copying a German design. But with an American, this is the first Zeppelin-style ship built with the use of helium in mind, which sort of changed certain things about the design in ways I'll point out more specifically in a moment when we get a closer look at the ship. Okay, I'm just going to scroll up a bit. Just have to wait for my software to catch up with me. Please scroll up. These are the little things I'll be editing out for the... Oh, okay. Excuse me. I see what's going on. I'm not... Excuse me. I'm being silly. I might as well show you this now then. Okay. Now, because the ship was built specifically for use with hydrogen, with helium rather than hydrogen, the lower ship is the USS Macon. And I just want to blow this up a bit. If you could really see how the USS Los Angeles, the German-built ship, the ship initially flown with hydrogen until once it arrived in the U.S., we then refilled it with helium, has internal engine cars, or these little pods on the side. So here the engine cars are external. There is an actual operator inside the engine car that is observing and operating the engine. Now, but on the ship built specifically for use with helium, we see that the engines are actually inside the envelope because with a helium ship, you don't have to worry about sparks from the diesel engine igniting the lifting gas. So they were able to mount the engines inside the airship. Whereas with the German design, which was built with hydrogen in mind, instead we have these external engine cars for safety's sake. Now, okay, now I see what I was being silly before, so I just want to scroll down to... So USS Akron, after the USS Akron crashed in a storm, later was the USS Macon, and the USS Akron and Macon, I don't believe they existed at the same time. So Macon kind of replaced the Akron in a sense. Now, to show the flying aircraft carrier when I was saying that. So basically, I'm just wait for the image to pop up. So the keel here is a aircraft hangar, and this here is not a depiction of either the Akron or Macon in particular. This is just kind of a loose illustration of the concept. but a trapeze arm could be lowered down from the dirigible, and inside are these aircraft and space to do a limited amount of maintenance on the aircraft, refueling, as well as space for all the crew. A trapeze arm would lower down and launch the ship, and when it was time for the ship to return to refuel, or for the pilot to take a break or whatever, or to maybe reload with ammo, the arm could reattach. The plane would reattach. There was basically a hook. The pilot would fly into the hook arm, and the trapeze arm would pull it up. And there's actually the video game Sky. What's that Xbox game? That sort of steampunk Xbox game with the biplanes and the zeppelins. What was that game called? It's one of those games that's really well regarded, and it's actually backwards compatible with modern Xbox systems. What was that game called? I forgot what it was called. Red Skies? Is that the name of the game? I think it was called Red Skies or something, or Crimson Skies. That's the name of the game. That game actually depicts fairly accurately what these ships were like, because I believe your mothership is a dirigible like this, and basically there's a carousel system where the arm would pull down, pull it up, and then it would rotate, so it could we could keep collecting and launching ships. So the idea was that these ships could be launched in batch. Correction, I meant to say planes and not ships. And there was, I don't have a diagram of this, but there was basically a zigzag formation where these, I know there are a couple of types of planes used with this. Most famous were the Curtiss Sparrowhawk, like spy planes / fighter planes. And these planes could fly in this zigzag pattern with the ship in the middle. So they could massively, I heard one historian say something like, the idea in the Navy was that the planes were extending the visibility range of the ship, because they could communicate via radio, so the plane could fly almost out of sight of the ship and report if they could see anything that the plane couldn't. And with the zigzag formation, they could identify if a fleet was approaching or something like that. There's speculation. There are war games, like tabletop war games that have been played by historians, with one team playing the Japanese fleet approaching Pearl Harbor for the surprise attack, and another, and where they include a Zeppelin scout ship in the formation on the American side, where the Americans are actually able to depict the surprise attack well in advance of what they were able to do with their surveillance means at the time. There are war games that have been run where the Americans know that the Japanese are coming and they engage them early, and the Japanese still win. But there are some stories I've read that the Japanese were ordered to retreat and call off the attack if they were spotted. So theoretically, if we had both, the USS Macon was lost, unfortunately, by the time by the time Pearl Harbor happened. So we didn't have these at our disposal to enhance our surveillance over the ocean. But it is speculated that if we had ships like this, that the Pearl Harbor would not have happened in the way that it did happen in our actual history. USS Macon was lost due to there was some I believe basically there was some damage that the ship suffered that weakened the ship structurally, but they decided it wasn't severe enough damage to ground the ship, and they were completing the repairs in phases, and the last phase of the repairs to strengthen the structure of the ship had not been completed, and had those repairs been completed, it probably would not have crashed in the storm that took the ship out. And one thing about the USS Akron and Macon, there is a second cockpit in the tail of the ship. So if in a battle situation, like enemy planes had shot out or destroyed the main gondola, they could retreat to the tail fin of the ship and continue to pilot the ship back to safety. So we're going to make that go away now. And so next we have probably the most infamous airship of all of the Zeppelins, the Hindenburg. By the 1938, at which point the airship, German airship program had been completely commandeered by the Nazi Party. Therefore, they were required to paint the swastikas on the tail fin, and it was infamous for doing runs where they would drop propaganda leaflets on German cities. At this point, the Graf Zeppelin was being used for flights to and from Rio de Janeiro, between Friedrichshafen and Rio de Janeiro, because the route to Rio de Janeiro was considered a safer, a milder flying conditions, and the Graf Zeppelin was an older ship by that point, whereas the Hindenburg was a more modern, more stronger ship, a ship that could withstand more severe storms. And actually, these ships, conflated with hydrogen, were able to safely withstand lightning strikes over the ocean in flight. Hindenburg was known to have been struck, and Graf Zeppelin too, were struck by lightning many times without leading to disaster. Because and now the Hindenburg, I want to show off. Let's see. But if you look at the difference in size between the Graf Zeppelin and the Hindenburg, they, after the loss of the R-101 in Great Britain, the Zeppelin decided, this is not really... They wanted to avoid using hydrogen for future airships. They decided, even though Germany had the best record of taming the beast. They had basically a demon in a bottle, and they were able to keep that demon in the bottle. And they were able to seemingly master the safe use of hydrogen in passenger airships. They had never had any hydrogen catastrophe with a passenger airship before. But even so, they decided, hydrogen, it's too risky. We're going to use helium imported from the United States. And so they built the Hindenburg so much larger to compensate for the fact that they'd be using helium. And also hydrogen. All of these German Zeppelins were constructed using gas bags that were built with what was called gold beater skins, which were the intestines of a cow's stomach that were used in... they were byproducts of the meat industry and were used by gold leaf layers. I forgot exactly how, but they'd use that thin membrane from the intestines of the cow to do gold leaf. And actually, during World War I, they requisitioned they ordered all German butchers to prepare and preserve their gold beater skins for use in airship construction, because they could use silk or cotton, but gold beater skins had the unique property of not building static charge, which are safer for use with helium. Excuse me, I meant to say hydrogen and not helium there. So they designed the Hindenburg to use rubberized cotton, I believe, gas bags, because they wouldn't have to worry about the hydrogen igniting. But the U.S. ended up refusing to export hydrogen to Germany, even for use in civilian airships. So I have to scroll back a little bit. And LZ-129, after the Hindenburg disaster, they completed construction of... A lot of people think of Hindenburg as the last passenger airship. It was the last one to carry passengers. But they actually completed construction of... And this was partially, to save face for the party, because the loss of the Hindenburg was a huge... black eye to the myth of German invincibility and infallibility. They built the Graf Zeppelin II, and when they were constructing Graf Zeppelin before they were already in the process of constructing the ship, but the idea was to replace the Graf Zeppelin LZ-127 with the Graf Zeppelin LZ-130, which we could now call the Graf Zeppelin II, and use the original Graf Zeppelin as a training ship and kind of retire it from passenger service, because they wanted a bigger, stronger ship, because the Hindenburg was only doing flights between Friedrichshafen and Lakehurst, New Jersey, essentially a Friedrichshafen to New York City service, whereas Graf Zeppelin was used on the milder flights, the milder conditioned flights from Friedrichshafen to Rio de Janeiro. And the idea was to replace the old Graf Zeppelin with a newer Graf Zeppelin with the stronger, more modern design, the more prestigious design of the Hindenburg class. I'm not going to show the Graf Zeppelin 2 because basically the Graf Zeppelin 2 was the Hindenburg but slightly shorter. And as you see, the Hindenburg, the propellers are on the back of the engine cars and push the ship forward, whereas the engine cars on the Graf Zeppelin 2, the propellers were on the front of the cars and would pull the ship forward. So they were what they were called tractor motor propellers instead of pusher motors. Now, the Graf Zeppelin 2 was constructed, used for propaganda purposes, but was never, because they could not get the helium, they would never used it for commercial passenger flights. And Hugo Eckner was rather ashamed that the Graf Zeppelin 2 was only used for propaganda flights and to do spying missions against the British and other future Allied countries. So they used it for espionage and spy missions and surveillance. They never used it for an actual passenger flight. And eventually the Nazis decided, we need warplanes. We don't need passenger airships anymore. So they scrapped both ships, the Graf Zeppelin 1 and Graf Zeppelin 2, the remaining rigid airships, to be used to build warplanes. And that was the end of rigid passenger airships. All right, so I think we have enough background at this point to get into the video. So this is to get into the video, which is what originally inspired me to. This is a video by Cheddar. I believe I can... Yes, I still have the link there. That's the link to the original video. We're going to be critiquing and criticizing and correcting the video. Now we're going to start with the thumbnail. Okay. So... There's videos called "Why the Airship Was a Design Disaster." Cheddar explains, and we have huge clickbaity title, clickbaity thumbnail, "Design Disaster." And I'm not gonna pretend that airplanes the airship should have won. It's like inevitability that that fixed-wing aircraft were the superior and more practical vehicles for what they were to be used for. But pretty much this design disaster, this clickbaity, attention-getting thumbnail, is basically implying that something was intrinsically wrong or intrinsically flawed with the concept of rigid airships. And to me, that would be like... Well, I'm going to nitpick the thumbnail a bit more in a minute. But first we're going to talk about... Basically what happened is the first... Zeppelin was built in 1900. The first proper rigid airship. It was built in 1900. They weren't able to build their second prototype until 1906. So that's a 6-year gap where they didn't have enough money and they couldn't develop the technology. And so when you get to 1904, we have the Wright brothers' first successful flight in a fixed-wing aircraft in 1904. And so we have these two... They kind of address this a little bit in the video itself. So I'll give them credit for that where credit's due, and we'll see that later. So basically, we have these two competing technologies kind of developing side by side. And basically, it's a lot cheaper to build an experiment with... We're going to build all these different fixed-wing aircraft, and we were crashing them and building them and left and right and experimenting, and it's progressing more and more quickly. Whereas it is very expensive and time-consuming and labor-intensive to construct an experimental rigid aircraft only to have it crash, and then you have to find the money and the time and the resources to rebuild. And so basically what I see it as, if we take a look at just the general concept of the steam locomotive here, it would be like if steam locomotives were invented, and then right alongside steam locomotives, we also happen to have diesel and electric traction come along. And because it's so less electric and internal combustion and electric locomotives are much cheaper to run, much less labor intensive, much safer, and so it's not like railroads used the steam locomotives because they had this love for steam that caused steam locomotives to last into the mid-20th century. It's just that that was the best technology available. And on the other hand, now I have to make this go away. So for instance, we have a steam-powered street railway, basically a steam-powered streetcar. But as soon as electric motors were able to move a single train car reliably, we have steam tramways or steam streetcars being replaced with electric streetcars. Now, the electric motors of that time were not powerful enough to move an entire full-scale train, but they were powerful enough to move a single train car on a street railway. Therefore, we have electric railroading replacing steam power in the late 19th century, whereas steam locomotives on the traditional railroads were maybe the electric motors and the internal combustion motors were not powerful enough to reliably use for a locomotive until you get into the later into the 20th century.
And yes, I know that electric traction was in operation on more substantial railroads, such as the New York City subway as early as 1904 and other examples, but you get the general idea of what I'm getting at, right?
Therefore, steam continued to dominate on railroads. And so basically what I'm saying is, it would be like if, like what happened with airships, it would be like if steam came along and just a decade later, we started already having major developments with powerful enough electric motors or diesel engines that, very quickly they stopped using steam. And we would have thought of steam locomotives as this thing that existed very earlier on in the 19th century, and then maybe by the mid to late 20th century, they just went away because they were obsolete. We'd think of steam locomotives as this crazy, wacky technology that was early in railroading, but was replaced almost instantly by diesels and electric. And that's kind of what happened with rigid airships as opposed compared to fixed-wing aircraft, where something better and more efficient just happened to come along better. And so when we have this clickbaity thumbnail saying why the rigid airship was a design disaster, that's why I consider that unfair. And to get into an actual aeronautics design disaster, if I were going to use that terminology, one example would be the de Havilland Comet. This was one of the first, if not the first, commercial jet aircraft for passenger use. And there were at least 3 catastrophes where these aircraft were crashed. I believe they broke apart mid-flight. And part of it was that they did not understand the concept of stress on aircraft bodies, because it was still earlier on into aviation. But what happened instead? Well, basically, these aircraft crashed in part because they made the windows square instead of round. And what was believed at the time was that when they looked into these crashes and why these airframes are failing, it was because the corners on the square windows were causing air to build up there and prematurely stress the airframe in those spots. They modified the design to have round windows, and at that point, that kind of stress was no longer a problem. So you have aircraft crashing because they made the windows the wrong shape. Really oversimplifying it, but that's what I would consider a design disaster. Whereas this clickbaity thumbnail is basically accusing airships of being a design disaster, like there was something intrinsically wrong with the concept of a rigid airship. Now, to sort of nitpick with this thumbnail a bit even more, this is the USS Macon, which was a Navy airship built as a flying aircraft carrier for Curtiss Sparrowhawk fighter planes. But in this cutaway here, we have the interior of what you can see. I don't know if you can see that text, but this is all labeled in German because this is a German document. I've seen the original document, I don't have it handy. It is a cutaway of a German passenger airship, and they're using that to make a cutaway of this American military U.S. Navy airship. And so the interior here is actually showing the interior of how the passenger accommodations, like the mess hall, and like the dining room and the drawing room, the smoking room, like the lounge areas, and the passenger cabins would have been placed inside the ship. But the interior of the USS Macon would not have been like this. It would have been to accommodate for military purposes rather than civilian purposes. So they're using the wrong cutaway for the ship, for a different, they're using a cutaway for a civilian ship instead of a passenger ship. A bit nitpicky. They did do a nice job doing a cutaway of what the inside was like, but the implication here is that they're zooming in on all these parts of the ship that were a design flaw, when that's really not the case. So now we're going to get into actually watching the video, parts of the video, and I will be critiquing, criticizing, but we're going to get started here. I will be pausing frequently with notes, corrections, comments. So here we go.
Airships were once believed to be the future of human flight. And that shouldn't be a surprise. The first airship took flight in 1852, 51 years before the Wright brothers successfully flew their first airplane. Even with budding competition from airplanes, airships remained the preferred form of air travel up until the early 1940s. But of course, the airship lost out to the airplane, and that's because in comparison, the airship was a design disaster.
Tragedy strikes. A terrific.
And of course, we cut straight to the Hindenburg. But, well, fair enough if you want to show the downsides of, you know, a hydrogen airship. So basically everything you said there, no objections, but just the design disaster, clickbait line, a little misleading, not really entirely fair. Now mind you, I'm not trying to argue that airships should have beat out airplanes. But I'm just saying that the idea that airships were rigid airships of this era were intrinsically flawed is not really accurate or fair.
The tail fin of the dirigible, and passengers and crew hurl themselves out of the ship into the ground.
Okay.
Navy and Army men risk their lives.
And mind you, this is by I believe, a crew of people that put this together. This is a major, I mean, they have a little check mark next to them on YouTube. So this is a major, this has more than 200,000 views. So that's why I took it so seriously, some of the mistakes that they made here.
The airship is rooted in the popularity of ballooning culture during the 1800s. Even Benjamin Franklin believed hot air balloons to be a discovery of great importance and one which may possibly give a new turn to human affairs. These early balloons were essentially what we now refer to as hot air balloons, which used heated air.
Yeah, so I just want to bring this up a bit. If you want to read about the history of ballooning, The Aeronauts by L.T.C. Rault, fantastic primary source. This is the copy that I used to rent from my college library because one of my campuses of my college was actually built on an active airport. Now, yeah, so this is a fantastic primary source. The author, L.T.C. Rault. We will be getting back to L.T.C. Rault at the end of my little lesson here, but we'll continue onward. Now, he does mention hot air balloons. There were also experiments with hydrogen balloons, including some. There was one experiment with a hybrid hydrogen hot air balloon combo that did not go well because the hot air was produced by burning fuel. All hot air balloons burn fuel, but burning they had an open fire on board in the gondola that they used to produce the hot air. And now, one interesting fact, earlier on, they believed that hot air had some, they believed that fire produced some kind of special undiscovered gas that caused the lifting effect. They didn't understand it was just a difference between an air temperature and air pressure.
Air to take off. At the time, it was a huge aeronautical advancement. However, these balloons were at the mercy of the winds, which often led to disaster, as depicted in this newspaper painting of a Savannah.
This is all accurate and reasonable and fair so far.
So French engineer Henry Gifford decided to make some key adjustments. First, he changed
and I just want to mention, the production value of the video is fantastic. The animations that they built into these static photos, so you're not just looking at static photos all the time, like my video, like that you're watching right now. lots of effort, production values. I can't match that. I'm not saying I'm better than them in that, but they just got a lot of their information and research just flat out wrong.
Next, for
in
more
embarrassing
control of
ways,
the
we'll
direction of
see.
the aircraft, he added a steam rudder and propeller. And on September 24th, 1852,
and this was one of the few, I know airships are often associated with sort of the steampunk aesthetic and steampunk culture. This is one of the few dirigibles actually to be powered by a steam engine. Steam, like, all dirigibles pretty much, when you get into the area of the ships I was talking about before, powered by internal combustion engines. So diesel oil or gasoline or blow gas or something like that.
To talk to you about Congress's generous mortgage relief program for the middle.
Okay, you don't need to hear about that.
Inventors began to experiment with semi-rigid and rigid dirigibles. Inventors like David Schwartz of Hungary. He believed metal was the answer. So he set out to build an all-aluminum rigid airship. In 1897, after two failed
This is all pretty accurate. If there are any mistakes, they're not worth my attention, I guess. All pretty sound enough, reasonable enough.
Never seeing his airship take flight. It was his wife, Melanie, who finally organized the maiden flight of David Schwartz's airship. It successfully achieved takeoff in a tethered test near Berlin, rising over 1,600 feet, but collapsed as it landed. Again, the airship proved just too fragile to be a realistic mode of air travel. Among the spectators of this first airship flight was Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, and he felt he had the solution. 30 years earlier, the Count was on a trip to the U.S. as an observer.
I already talked a little about this, so we have some Ken Burns-esque photos
to reconnaissance, balloons he saw rising high above the battlefields. This launched him into a lifelong obsession with air travel. By the time he saw Schwartz's balloon lift off in Berlin, the Count had already sketched up his version of the airship, and the next year, it was under construction. Zeppelin's version had some similarities to Schwartz's design, but had some key
So I was distracted by my broadcast software a bit, but hold on, we gotta rewind a bit. I messed that up.
Of the airship, and the next year, it was under construction. Zeppelin's version had some similarities to Schwartz.
Okay. This is not the construction of the LZ-1. I mean, as you saw... Oh, well, actually, I had this ready. I might as well... The very first human-piloted balloon, I believe... As I understand it, this was what it looked like. If you want to look more into that. But that is not the construction of the LZ-1. That is potentially the construction of... If it is an American airship, it only could be... what I have a photograph of here, the USS Shenandoah. Because of the design, if you see on the bottom, you can see the glass panels of the control car or gondola, and it's like sort of slung, like not just attached beneath, but just sort of hanging out beneath the actual main structure of the envelope. That is a If this is the construction of a German Zeppelin, that would have been done. It had to be pre-1919, because after 1919, that's when Zeppelin started building the gondolas really sort of more integrated into the envelope and had that more streamlined design. So this is definitely it might be a British airship of many. It could be the USS Shenandoah of the United States, but that is definitely not the construction of the LZ-1. So we're already sort of abusing B-roll in misleading ways, like, yeah, for illustrative purposes, but you're talking about the first construction of the first Zeppelin airship, and they're showing unrelated footage in a misleading way, as though to imply that this is depicting the construction of the first Zeppelin, the LZ-1.
Design, but had some key advantages. First, it was absolutely massive. His first airship, the LZ-1, as it was called, measured nearly 420 feet.
Okay. For those who've been here for the first part of the stream, this is clearly not the LZ-1. This is the Graf Zeppelin. Okay? And they're showing footage of the LZ-1. I mean, they're showing footage of the Graf Zeppelin while talking about the LZ-1. So this is the LZ-1, and above is the ship that they're showing footage of while giving stats for the LZ-1. So they're using footage of the Graf Zeppelin to depict and implying that it's the LZ-1. So that's just really not very good practice. Now, and why this is I'm going to go into a little more detail why this is such an egregious mistake, or bad practice or whatever. Now, this down there below in this picture, this is the lower ship is the Graf Zeppelin. The upper ship is the LZ-1. The Graf Zeppelin is number LZ-127, which means it is the 127th ship to be designed by the Zeppelin company. And the first airship that they're talking about is the LZ-1, the upper ship, and these are to scale with each other. So they're basically just talking about the first design while showing the 127th design. So they're basically, I'll give an example here. I'll give two examples here. That is the equivalent of talking about Stephenson's rocket, the breakthrough early steam locomotive, and while talking about Stephenson's rocket and showing footage of the LNER A4 Pacific locomotive, the Mallard, with the rocket being an early breakthrough locomotive, and the upper one being the early breakthrough at the cusp of the development of this technology, and the lower one being basically the ultimate form of the ultimate development of this technology. And by the way, Mallard remains to this day the world's fastest steam locomotive, traveled at 126 miles per hour, which it nearly destroyed itself doing. It basically pulled into the station in pieces practically, but it did achieve 126 miles per hour, a record which will likely never be beaten. If it is beaten, it'll be beaten by a new build locomotive using modern technology. The thing is, they might have that's the thing, they might have, I think this team has, Cheddar has, I believe, a team that they could have, basic Wikipedia searches could have given them the footage they needed. I think they just used whatever footage they felt like. And for a less esoteric example, well, maybe more mainstream recognizable, using footage of the Graf Zeppelin while discussing the LZ-1 is like using showing a photo of the Ford Model T and discussing the Ford Model T and using a picture of a Ford Mustang. It's pretty much like night and day difference, completely inaccurate depiction of the type of technology, the level of expertise and knowledge they had. Like, if the LZ-1 had been built to the knowledge and with the information we know of, if LZ-1 was the Graf Zeppelin as it was built, the airplane might have never been developed in our world whatsoever. Because that level of technology was so developed that airplanes might have remained small vehicles. It might have set back the development of the fixed-wing aircraft by 30 to 50 years, and I may not be exaggerating that much. Now, oops, excuse me, that's a little spoiler for what's coming up ahead. I need that to go away. So we see what we're dealing with here. We're going to continue with the video now.
In length, longer than a football field. This size allowed the airship to carry heavier, more
footage of the Graf Zeppelin.
Next, it was filled with 17 individual airbags instead of one large air cavity.
Once again, this is not an interior. Okay, I'm going to cut them a little slack here. This is an interior. I don't know what ship this is. It is definitely... You know what? This might be the interior of a semi-rigid airship. I'm not sure, though. Yeah, this might be the interior of a semi-rigid. I can't say for sure. But to illustrate the concept of an internal rigid airframe, I can't fault them too much for using this footage here. So we'll keep moving.
This created a safety net of sorts.
Not the LZ... Once again, not the LZ-1.
The LZ-1 took its maiden flight on July 2nd, 1900.
Yes,
the flight lasted about 18
this is not
minutes
LZ-1.
and covered about 3.5
That's the Graf Zeppelin, not the LZ-1.
In Germany. But Zeppelin and his team kept building upon previous designs.
Yeah, excuse me. One of my people watching in chat. Yeah, that's exactly. That's like talking about PlayStation 1 and showing a picture of a PlayStation 5. I don't know why. I mean, we're on Twitch. I do not know why I didn't think of that more obvious example.
The company had built 21 airships, each one larger than the last. In January 1915, Germany
This is all
employed 3
pretty
Zeppelins,
straight.
the L3,
I do want to point
L4,
out
and
it's not a egregious problem. It's not. It's sort of irrelevant and just a little bit of trivia or just clarification. The Zeppelin company was not the only manufacturer of airships for Germany in World War One. There were other ships built by, I believe the company was called Schüttelands. I don't know how to say that because I don't speak or read German. But there was another company building rigid airships for Germany. The German ones were more plentiful, I believe more successful. I believe Schüttelands also experimented with building rigid airships out of wood. I don't think that was especially successful, but that is something I just throw in there.
in a 2-day bombing mission against Britain, successfully dropping their bombs on English coastal towns. 4 people were killed. By the end of the war, a total of 84 Zeppelins were built and 51 raids had been carried out on England alone, killing 550.
I've always loved sci-fi and the idea of being right.
Okay, there we go.
The demand for Zeppelins as a war machine allowed the technology to improve greatly. By the end of the war, Zeppelins like the R-class were over 600 feet long and could reach speeds of...
Okay, all right. I just want to play that again.
And 57 people.
Okay.
The demand for Zeppelins as a war machine allowed the technology to improve greatly. By the end of the war, Zeppelins like the R-class were over 600 feet long.
Okay, that is not an R-class Zeppelin. That is an R-33 class Zeppelin. And, excuse me, and to be more precise, it is not a Zeppelin. It is a British rigid airship. And this says, like, airships like the R-class. There was an R-class of German Zeppelins built during World War I. I guess whoever sourced the photos just found these photos of these ships that say R on them. Like, as all the British airships were given an R, designation. So R-33, R-34, R-100, R-101. And so they just used that. I don't know if they knew their mistake or if they cared. But so the R class has nothing to do with what they're showing here. The R class are a specific set of German Zeppelins built during World War One. They have nothing to do with the R-34, 35, so forth designations of the British rigid airships.
And could reach speeds of 64 miles per hour. Airships were about to enter.
And since they showed the R-101 while saying they did not give the right miles per hour for R-101, R-101 could reach 71 miles per hour.
Their golden age. Countries like the US and UK had airship fever. And in 1919, the British airship R-34 became the first to cross the Atlantic, landing in Mineola, Long Island, New York, after a 108-hour-long flight. Airships were undoubtedly the future of air travel.
One reason why airships were far more popular
than
little putt-putt
okay,
airplanes.
I want to pause. They did pay to I presumably paid to consult an expert about this. And the full name of those are, I don't know if R stood for Royal, but the full formal title of the names of these ships were, like, the R-100 was officially named, like, the official formal title was His Majesty's Airship R-100. So they did, they're consulting experts about this. So, like, I give them credit where I can. So
because
he mentioned this, but I'll go into a little more detail. The flights on board these the large Zeppelin transatlantic liners were extremely smooth. There was one story where one passenger he would put a pencil on its eraser end sticking upward while sitting in the lounge on the table. He put it during dinner. He put a pencil facing up on his table while he ate, and by the end of dinner, the pencil had not fallen over. was able to very a smooth flying ship, and they were able to fly very low to the water safely, to the point where there are stories of people on the Hindenburg looking out of windows and seeing schools of whales flying actually in the water. That's how low to the water they were able to fly safely. It wasn't like aircraft where when you fly transatlantic, you're flying at up in thin air, So
they were much larger, obviously, and they were much more comfortable. If you went up in an airplane,
much more comfortable.
I'm talking
this part is they're pretty much accurate here because it's an actual expert.
First, the decibel level was louder than the New York subway. So if you want to subject that to yourself for 3 hours or something, that's up to you. It was definitely, it rattled.
And the footage is done via webcam. Look how cramped that plane is. That is like narrower than a train car. That is tiny little accommodations. And this poor porter is serving people food and drinks. But the interview was conducted via webcam, so if it looks a little funny, that's why.
During any flight on an
the footage with the expert they're consulting.
1920s, early 30s. They were subject to enormous turbulence. They could have 100-foot drops at any moment. Whereas with an airship, they could fit up to 50 people, and you had you had your own bedroom, you had your
and that's 50 passengers, not they would almost have equal numbers of passengers and crews. The Hindenburg had around 100 on board during the fatal disaster, the fatal flight.
It's essentially like being on a cruise liner in the air, as opposed to this little shuddering airplane.
But throughout this period of success, airships were also showing their flaws. On September 9th, 1913, a German Zeppelin traveling above the North Sea flew into a severe thunderstorm. Strong winds and...
Okay, German Zeppelin, that is... And they show the R-100. Okay. And the funny thing is, they could have very easily, just looking up on Wikipedia, find public domain period illustrations of the craft that they're talking about here. Of the actual crash they're talking about. But here's the ridiculous thing. The crash they're referring to, they're talking about, is the crash of the LZ-14, which crashed in 1913. But the picture... hold on. So they show the R101. Let me get rid of those. Those are period pictures of the actual crash that they're talking about. Actually, these are pictures of the actual crash they're talking about. But the picture that they are going to show is a picture of a different crash. And with all those rigid airship crashes, it's funny that they decided to single out this one. There are other examples they could have used. So, okay, let's go on.
Cold rain caused its gas to contract. The airship split in two and...
So, this is the crash of the L-19, which was LZ-54, which is manufacturer number. The German Armed Forces renamed it L-19. This was a crash that happened in 1916. So they're talking about a crash that happened in 1913, and the crash depicted here happened in 1916. Now, interesting story about this crash. This ship had just finished a bombing run against a British city. And then it crashed out of the ocean. And the fishing vessel here was a British fishing vessel, actually encountered them. And the crew on board, you could see them on top of the envelope of the ship as it's sinking into the ocean, were apparently waving for them, and they were calling for help and promising money. They surrendered, and they promised that they wouldn't bear their arms against them, and that they were surrendering. And, well, the ship was practically, from the looks of it, too small to actually carry all those the crew of the crashed ship. Second, they are their wartime enemies, but on the other hand, the wartime enemies who had just used that very ship to bomb targets of his home country, but they had surrendered, so there was question as to whether or not the crew of the fishing vessel was legally or morally culpable, if they had a responsibility to try to rescue as many as they could. but their argument was even without guns, they were outnumbered them. They could have hijacked the ship and sailed it back to Germany, or back to German-controlled territory, instead of letting them take them back to England to be captured. So it's a bit of a controversial flight, but they are showing the wrong crash here, and just a simple Wikipedia search could have actually got them some public domain photos depicting the actual specific crash that they're talking about. And in fact, this depiction of this incident of the L-19 was used as the basis for the artwork of a Nazi-era anti-British medal of conduct that was awarded for, I guess, taking certain anti-British actions. So it was used as anti-British propaganda by the Nazis later on.
The water below, 13 of its 20 passengers drowned. And on May 6th, 1937, the most infamous Zeppelin accident occurred. The LZ-129 Hindenburg was the largest airship ever built. It was 778 feet long. It could carry almost 5 million cubic feet of hydrogen. 10 Maybach engines powered 5 separate engine cars. It could carry 56...
Okay, let's listen to those stats again. Let's listen to all those numbers again.
The
Listen to these stats.
Was the largest airship ever built. It was 778 feet long. It could carry almost 5 million cubic feet of hydrogen. 10 Maybach engines powered 5 separate engine cars. It could carry 56 crew.
Okay. Except for 56 crew, every single one of those stats was completely incorrect. They got all those numbers wrong, and that's very embarrassing. Now let's take... I have prepared... Look at this. Okay. On top is the incorrect stats that they used in the video, and beneath are the actual stats of the Hindenburg. 778 feet, it was actually 803 feet. 10 Maybach engines, actually 4 Daimler-Benz engines. 5 power cars, actually 4 power cars. Gas volume, they say nearly 5 million. It was actually over 7 million feet of lifting gas. So every single one of those stats was completely wrong. And it's funny, Cheddar's stats are for like 778 feet, they underestimate the length. They get the number of engines wrong. But they underestimate the length and the number of the volume of lifting gas, and they also get the number of engines and engine cars wrong, and they get the manufacturer of the engines wrong. So they got everything wrong there. So my thought was, why are all those numbers so wrong? Did they just go to Wikipedia and I'm like, okay. And I looked at Wikipedia, and the stats they had listed on Wikipedia for the Hindenburg were correct. And I actually looked back historically, because you look back to see the changes. So I looked back for around the time when they might have been preparing, because this video was November 24th, so maybe in October or September, some troll changed the stats or something like that. No, the numbers for the Hindenburg were always right on... The stats for the Hindenburg were always right on Wikipedia. So I'm like, alright, where the heck did these numbers come from? So, and I really just let go of it. Okay, they just got all those numbers wrong, whatever. So then I started just reading the Wikipedia article for the Hindenburg. Alright? And so they have the introductory section, and then the first major section of the Wikipedia article for the Hindenburg. The first major section is describing the design history of what led to the design of the Hindenburg. So let's read this here. Design and development. Main article, Hindenburg-class airship. The Zeppelin Company had proposed LZ-128 in 1929, after the world flight of the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin. This ship was to be approximately 778 feet long and carry nearly 5 million cubic feet of hydrogen. 10 Maybach engines were to power 5 tandem engine cars, though a plan from 1930 only showed 4. The disaster of the British airship R101 prompted the Zeppelin company to reconsider the use of hydrogen, therefore scrapping the LZ-128 in favor of building a new airship designed for helium, the LZ-129. So, an LZ-129 is the ship they ended up naming the Hindenburg. And like I said before, they numbered the airship. Zeppelin numbered their airships not by the number of airships built, but the number of airships they had designed. So they built LZ-128, and then they canceled it and built the Hindenburg to a different design instead. And look at that. Look at the numbers that Cheddar lists as the stats for the Hindenburg are actually the stats for the unbuilt LZ-128 instead of the actual LZ-129. So what that means is that whoever was doing the research for this just jumped, and I never, it's hard to nail someone so specifically for misusing Wikipedia, but they just jumped on the Wikipedia article for the airship LZ-129 Hindenburg, looked at they just scrolled through the article, saw the first stats describing the length, the engines, the first descriptions of the length, the cubic feet of lifting gas, and the types of engines, and the number of engines, and the number of engine cars, and they just copied and pasted those numbers, assuming that they were the stats for the LZ-129 Hindenburg, and they did not actually look at what they were copying, because they're just like, oh, Wikipedia is full of lies, that's its own issue. Like, they could just have incorrect information. They had correct information, but they were not looking at what they were copying, because they were copying the stats for an unbuilt airship that preceded the design that was planned, and then they canceled the LZ-128 and built the Hindenburg LZ-129 instead. So we just caught them flat out just going on Wikipedia, just scrolling down, seeing the first description, the first stats they see, and just copying those down. And once again, the explanation for the difference between the stats of the LZ-128 and LZ-129 are that the LZ-129... I don't think I explicated on this. The LZ-128 was kind of a derivative of the Graf Zeppelin, which was a very successful design. But when they decided to build a ship specifically for use of helium, they built the ship so much larger, and these are to scale, the Graf Zeppelin, LZ-128, 127, and LZ-129, and the Hindenburg. The reason the Hindenburg was so much larger was because the helium does not burn like hydrogen does. But on the other hand, the sacrifice is that hydrogen has inferior lifting capacity compared to helium. Helium has inferior lifting capacity compared to hydrogen. So an X amount of hydrogen can lift more weight than the same amount of helium. So they made the ship larger to partially accommodate for that. And it's interesting that they chose, I guess they weren't entirely sure if they could get their hands on the helium or not, because they did build the Hindenburg with the external engine cars, where if they were guaranteed sure that they could build using the with helium in mind, they might have even built internal engine cars in the Hindenburg. Another thing I'll point out is that as part of the Goodyear-Zeppelin agreement that led to the construction of the USS Akron and USS Macon, the flying aircraft carriers, I believe they had options to construct rigid airships directly from German designs, such as the Graf Zeppelin and the Hindenburg, but Goodyear could not replicate those plans easily, because the German plans were all, the German designs and all the German tools were all using metric universal measurements, whereas the Goodyear tools and measurements in North America were all based on traditional American or Imperial American, Imperial/American. I know there's some difference between Imperial American. They're using customary units instead of universal international units in the metric system. So we had a chance to, if U.S. had switched to metric earlier on, we might have actually built more rigid airships in this era. So, so that is probably the most egregious of the errors that were made. They used the stats from a ship that was never actually built, and assuming that those were the stats for the Hindenburg. And I scrolled through all the comments. There were some people calling out other mistakes they made. Actually, people calling out only one specific mistake they made. A comment about hydrogen, the unavailability of helium later on, but also the fact that using footage of the Graf Zeppelin to depict the LZ-1. People called them out on that. None of the comments I saw called out them using the stats of the unbuilt LZ-128, which had only been the furthest they got along. They built the blueprints, and there are actually photos that exist of wind tunnel tests of the unbuilt LZ-128, but they canceled it and built LZ-129, which was then named Hindenburg. So we have stats. They're using stats for an airship that was never even built, because of them copying and pasting from Wikipedia, not paying attention to what they were actually copying.
Between Germany and the United States that year. A one-way fare between Germany and the United States was $400, equivalent to $7,370 in 2019. The Hindenburg had the world in awe. But on May 6th, 1937, disaster struck.
Just enough to keep it.
I want to mention there was a public event where I could have pulled up photos of this, where some Nazi Party officials basically forced Hugo Eckener's hand in taking the Hindenburg out to do a propaganda flight for some international photographers. And he was like, no, we didn't schedule or plan for this flight, and the wind is bad today. It is not safe to to take the ship out of the hangar. And the the people, the SS guys or whoever was there from the Nazi Party basically said, you have to. You don't have a choice. So upon as they were leaving the hangar, there was a burst of wind, and it caused the ship to crash into the ground, and it damaged it significantly damaged the tail fin of the Hindenburg. And the international photographers started taking pictures of it. And the Nazi Party officials confiscated all of their film because they didn't want anything that reflected badly on the leadership. So when they had an argument right in front of them that it's not safe to fly today, you were going to crash the ship if we do, and they flew it out, and they actually did damage the ship, and they had to fly it back into the hangar, and they never actually completed the flight. One of the American photographer managed to hide his film from the Nazi Party officials, and he was able to smuggle the film back to the U.S., whereas the Nazis, all the other photos of the damage were destroyed. And so we have photos of this thanks to that photographer who really stuck his neck out, because if he got caught hiding the film, he probably could have gotten in a lot of trouble, even as an American. And Hugo Eckener was heard basically shouting, how dare they risk the ship and risk everyone's safety, doing what he called this pissing contest flight or something to that effect. And when word of that got back to the secret police, he was too popular to assassinate, so they actually blacklisted him from being mentioned in any form of, because in an authoritarian state, all messages, all communications, all radio, and all radio, newspapers, and the actual television, that they did actually use television in Nazi Germany, which is an interesting story in and of itself, but no one was allowed to publish anything that wasn't approved by the party, so they basically refused to mention Hugo Eckener in any way, shape, or form. So rather than assassinating him, he was just sort of made a non-person, as they would be called. So Hugo Eckener was outspoken anti-fascist, and though he was the anti-fascist in Germany that was too popular and to assassinate. So, okay, I want to talk a little bit about the final flight of the Hindenburg. Basically, they were running late. A lot of the general consensus as to why the Hindenburg crashed, why the disaster took place, was you have the internal frame is held together by high tension guy wires, and they were running late, and to their flight to New York. And there's tension, a lot of pressure to fly on time, to arrive in New York on time, turn the ship around, refuel, restock it, get the next set of passengers and crew on board to fly back to Germany, so that because there were people on board the next flight. And by the way, for a lot of transatlantic ocean liner crossings by steamship, you would be on board a ship for a week. If you wanted to go to Europe, whereas the Hindenburg could get you to Europe or to across the ocean in only 3 days. So it was a huge deal, time save flying a Zeppelin on a rigid airship as compared to a steamship by the ocean. But what happened was they were running late, and there were people wanting to see the coronation of the next British monarch, and so they did not want to be late on their next flight back. There potential it would look bad, and if it made the Germans look bad, they could potentially be punished by the party. So there was pressure to land the ship as quickly as possible. There was stormy, lightning conditions, so it was not safe to land in the Lakehurst Naval Air Station. And so they had to delay the flight and take a circuitous route. They did a slow flight over in New York City for the passengers to sort of take their mind off the fact that they were being delayed. And what it was believed is that in the rush, and Hugo Eckner was on board this flight, and it is believed by many experts that because I'm doing this to I'll use my water bottle, right? This is the Hindenburg, right? It was believed that they were supposed to take turns very slowly and gently with a rigid airship but they were taking lots of fast whip tail kind of turns, trying to moor as quickly as possible. And it's believed in making those whip tail turns that it put so much stress on the body frame of the ship that one of the structural wires might have snapped, and it's under so much pressure that when the wires snapped, it might have tore open one of the gas bags, because some eyewitnesses witnessed some fluttering over the tail end of the ship, fluttering of the outer fabric of the envelope, which could only be caused by escaping hydrogen. And with escaping hydrogen and them dropping those wires down for the ground crew to catch and secure the ship to the mooring mast, could have caused a spark somewhere within the ship. And with escaping hydrogen, that's all you needed to ignite a fire, which would have led to the loss of the ship. Now, there's some conjecture that the coat of sealing, what they call the dope on the outer coating of the envelope, was potentially flammable itself. And there's some people say, the Hindenburg was coated in rocket fuel because the doping agent was similar to the composition of certain rocket fuels. But that's really kind of discredited by a lot of experts by the fact that the ship, it's clearly the gas is burning before the outer skin, because in the Hindenburg disaster footage, the tail blows up first, so you lose the lifting gas, the tail sinks. And so the gas wants to rise. So it's the burning gas is rising. It's burning through the nose of the ship, before the skin burns. The skin doesn't start burning on the front of the ship till the ship's frame already strikes the ground. And funnily enough, there's this element where a lot of people, when it comes to hydrogen cars is the future progressive fuel source for automobiles, where critics of hydrogen vehicles will say hydrogen's too dangerous. Look at what happened with the Hindenburg. the use of hydrogen as a lifting gas in rigid airships of the 1920s and 30s has absolutely nothing to do with the use of hydrogen fuel cells. I've seen some hydrogen fuel cell advocates spreading that to try to damage control hydrogen by, when the hydrogen fuel cell critics use the Hindenburg disaster to argue against the use of hydrogen fuel cells, which is a silly argument. They try to argue that the Hindenburg disaster had nothing to do with hydrogen. It's like, you don't even have to make that argument, because the use of lifting gas has nothing to do with modern hydrogen. The use of lifting gas in an airship has nothing to do with modern hydrogen fuel cells to produce electricity. So we'll continue on a little bit.
Disaster struck.
Just enough to keep it from... It's first into flight. Get it started. It's fighting, and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my. Get out of the way, please.
I mean, bless this guy for having the composure to accurately describe this disaster coherently as it's taking place.
Seconds for flames to completely envelop the Hindenburg.
And,
a total of 36 people lost their lives.
Now, 36 out of about 100 people on board. Actually, most of the people on board the ship survived. There's one story of a cabin boy, or something to that effect, who was washing dishes in the Hindenburg's kitchen as the ship was landing, because they're all working as the ship's landing. He was washing dishes, and when the ship, when the lost buoyancy in the back as it was burning. And he was facing the front of the ship with the sink, and the water splashed, and the sink splashed onto him as the ship, canted backwards. So when the ship leveled out again, because he was covered in water, he was able to run through the flames and escape the ship because it was sizzling off, it was burning off the water before it started burning his skin and his clothes. So he had relatively minor injuries. But actually, people think of, talk about the Titanic and the Hindenburg. If you had to be on one or the other, you actually would rather be on board the Hindenburg because, well, the Hindenburg had many successful voyages, whereas the Titanic didn't even complete one. But aside from that, there was if you were to fly on that, if you choose between being on board the Hindenburg or being on board the Titanic on their fateful voyages, the Hindenburg, much higher, most of the people survived. Many were severely injured and had life-lasting injuries, or, and physically, let alone mentally, and lost family and loved ones. So even the survivors suffered tremendously, but there were many, much higher, most of the people on board survived. And in addition to that, it's a naval air station. Navy sailors were there helping the ship to land into more. So you had people with military training specifically prepared to deal with potential disasters such as this, that were able to provide first aid and medical assistance. Whereas even many people who survived the actual sinking of the Titanic froze to death, because they couldn't get on board a lifeboat and they didn't have emergency aid and first aid available immediately. So lots of reasons why the Hindenburg, if you had to be on board one or the other on their fateful voyages, you'd probably rather be on board the Hindenburg.
Decision, airships of the time, like the Hindenburg, chose hydrogen over helium. Helium is not flammable. Hydrogen is highly flammable. Hydrogen air mixtures can ignite with very low energy input, 1/10 of the heat required for igniting a gasoline air mixture. There had been numerous airship disasters prior, some with larger death tolls, but the horrific scene captured by photographers was ingrained into the eyes of the public. Many blame this moment as the cause for the death of the airship. But there were other issues that made the air...
And this was pretty much the first disaster to have really been caught on film as it was happening. And people, we often, in modern viewings like just now, they often marry the newsreel coverage, the newsreel footage, to the radio coverage, but they were actual separate. Like the guy doing I believe it was Phil Morrison doing the radio coverage. He was actually just doing radio coverage, and they married that to the newsreel footage later on. The audio engineer who was with him doing the broadcast, the explosion of the ship actually knocked the stylus of the, because they were recording this live on a record. They were recording this in real time on vinyl or wax or something. Actually knocked the stylus of the groove out of the groove, and he in real time was able to replace the needle, the recording needle, onto the medium, which allowed the recording to be captured. And if it was not for his engineer quickly replacing the stylus on the recording medium, we would have never been able, people listening live would have been able to listen to the broadcast, and we would have no enduring recording of the broadcast. Would have been lost to history. There would have been no physical recording of it, as I understand. So, and also he mentions that, I don't know if it was right before this or after, that helium was used as a cost-saving measure. No, they wanted to use helium. The United States would not sell helium to the government of Nazi Germany, which at that point was already showing signs of aggression, so they did not want to give them helium that could potentially be used for military airships. And another thing is that because they built the Hindenburg so much larger with the anticipation of using helium, I believe they could carry an extra 10 passengers using hydrogen that they otherwise could not have carried if they had been using helium. So yeah, they wanted to use helium, and they didn't want to use hydrogen, but they did avail themselves of the increased weight capacity that using hydrogen did avail them of.
Option for mass commercial travel.
First, they were very, very expensive to build, and you could build,
Yeah, it's not that the technology was bad. It's just that
for the price of one giant Zeppelin.
Airplane engineers were able to experiment more and faster.
It was cheaper to experiment with airplanes than with airships, so the technology was able to come along quicker. Plus, World War II pushed the technology forward a lot quicker.
Airships were no laggards. I mean, these things were, the Hindenburg, for instance, could go in a good wind,
another
factor at the time
is
fast, but airplanes went faster.
Yeah, really, it's just that airplanes just happen to come along at the right time. I mean, if the Wright brothers didn't get lucky that day in 1904, and maybe they might have given up, maybe it would have taken a few more another decade or two to develop airplanes, and rigid airships would have had more of a foothold.
It took 22 hours to reach Marseille, with stops at Porto.
So nearly 24 hours, and it was a multi-stage flight. They could not fly those seaplanes like they cannot fly them non-stop.
The airship has since slipped into our collective memory.
They are beautiful objects. They are these spectacular queens of the air that once sort of strode the world's skies and have since vanished.
The only places we can glimpse remnants of these air giants today are the blimps flying overhead at sporting events.
Okay. Now this, he says, rightfully so, the only remnants of the airship age are blimps, or pressure airships, but ironically this is not a blimp. This is a Zeppelin NT. When the Zeppelin company, the original Zeppelin company, when it was, shut down, its shutdown clause, basically, as I understand it, included a clause for a fund to be set aside to resume production of airships under a reformed company, which did happen. And Zeppelin, their ships are called Zeppelin NT, NT standing for New Technology, and they are semi-rigid airships. And the difference, you could easily spot a Zeppelin NT as compared to a typical blimp, because a Zeppelin NT will have its control car on the front end of the ship, more towards the front, which is not possible with a typical blimp, where the gondola is basically hanging off the bottom of the envelope, whereas a Zeppelin NT, because it has that internal airframe, the gondola can be placed more towards the front. Zeppelin NTs are the largest lighter-than-air craft in existence today. There's a company called Airship Ventures, which unfortunately has collapsed that owned a airship that they named Eureka. They were operating out of California, and they were doing round trip tours on airships, and also point A to point B flights within California. And they were the only company in North America, if not the world, where you could actually buy a ticket to ride on an airship, because the Goodyear airships are used for, they're used as camera platforms and for publicity purposes, but you cannot buy a ticket on a Goodyear blimp. And so Airship Ventures had the only airship that could be flown using that you could buy, where passengers could buy a ticket to ride the airship. Now, it was a very small cabin. It wasn't like the luxurious accommodations of the transatlantic liners of yore, but it was a bigger cabin than any blimp. And I know Steve Wozniak actually used to take flights on them, and they would have sponsors that would pay to have their artwork put on them. And actually, I ran a grassroots fan campaign of fans, that were excited about the new Nintendo system at the time, the Wii U. And I actually started a campaign and at the time, Airship Ventures was looking for a sponsor. And they were desperately in need of a sponsor, because they had leased the airship from Zeppelin, and if they could not find a sponsor to pay for continued operation of the airship, they would have to send it back to Germany. So basically, their Zeppelin was going to get repossessed, pretty much, which is a weird thing to say, kind of the stuff of a steampunk story. And so I petitioned for Nintendo to sponsor Airship Ventures and have them put the Wii and use put the Wii U logo on the sides of the airship, and have the world's biggest airship flying around with the Wii U logo on it and go on tour. And I was able, because this was all done through social media, I don't know how far it got. It could just have been the whims of perhaps some intern, if they use interns for this kind of stuff, some intern at Nintendo, perhaps, whoever was running Nintendo of America's Twitter feed, and whoever it was at Airship Ventures, Airship Ventures actually tweeted at Nintendo of America, like, hey, Op Blue Wave, which was the name of Operation Blue, which is the name of my grassroots fan campaign, which some people who view my stream were participating in. It's like, oh, Nintendo of America, Blue Wave wants you to sponsor our airship. We'd be happy to put the Wii U logo on the side of the world's biggest airship and help you promote your new system. I got far enough that I got Nintendo of America and Airship Ventures to follow each other on Twitter. I actually did get Nintendo of America's Twitter account, a North American Twitter account at the time, to follow Airship Ventures, and Airship Ventures followed Nintendo back. I don't know how far discussion went within Nintendo, but at the very least, as an act of whimsy, whoever was operating Nintendo of America's Twitter feed did follow Airship Ventures. And I was trying to save. I wanted Nintendo. I was worried that Wii U could actually turn out be a flop. I would want to do everything I could to, show that there's grassroots support from gamers, hardcore gamers, for Wii U. And so I wanted to help Nintendo, and I wanted to help Airship Ventures because they wanted to them to have a sponsor so they didn't have to dismantle the airship and send it back to Germany. And Airship Ventures at the time did have the world's largest example of a Zeppelin NT airship. And when they went on tour with farmers, before they lost the farmer sponsorship, they went on a nationwide tour, and they actually flew to New York City and during the New York City section of their tour, they used the hangar at the Air Force Base in Lakehurst to house their airship. And it was the first return of a Zeppelin-built airship to Lakehurst since the Hindenburg disaster. And and later after that, and unfortunately Airship Ventures had to shutter their operations. And it was especially sad because Airship Ventures, they would often tweet with their airship in the first person, as though the airship was alive, like it was something out of Thomas the Tank Engine or something, where it's like, oh, I'm flying over to New Jersey next, come. So, and they did a lot of sort of almost role-playing type tweets, where you're sort of supposed to pretend that you're talking to the airship when you tweeted at them, which made it especially tragic when they were trying to save the company, like, oh, like, please, I hope someone sponsors me or else they're going to have to dismantle me and send me back to Germany. It was very, very sad when they had to shut down the company. But, they did manage to, they had to mothball, they had to dismantle the ship and send it back to Germany. And let me pull up. I'm just going to pull up a random airship here. Let's pull up the Bodensee, which is actually I'm going to talk a little more about the Goodyear ship since I happen to have it on screen. So after Airship Ventures closed up shop, they did announce that the new Goodyear airships were going to be Zeppelin NTs constructed in Germany for Goodyear. And there was a bit of backlash that I saw online to this reaction. It's like, oh, like the Goodyear airships aren't even built in America anymore, and now they're being built in Germany. But like I said, there was a history of the Zeppelin company and the Goodyear company working together to build airships like the USS Akron here, and they formed the Goodyear Zeppelin company, that joint venture between the Zeppelin and Goodyear companies. So it's actually fitting that Goodyear would work with the successor to the Zeppelin company to construct airships. There was a point where I was living near a NASCAR racetrack, and I did get to see a Zeppelin NT in person. So I did get to see a semi-rigid airship in person. So we're just going to pull up... let's pull up the... let's pull up the Bodensee here. Where's Bodensee? Yeah. Actually... I'm being indecisive on which airship I want to pull up for the tail end of this. And so... so that's... that is Bodensee. I want to highlight this because it's not a ship you hear about very often, and it's one of the few examples of airships being used for commuter flights where you just get on board for an hour or two just in between cities. So this is maybe a bit of a glimpse of what things we could have seen more smaller Zeppelins like this had fixed-wing aircraft not developed at the time that they did. And they're a staple in speculative fiction. What if airplanes were never invented? What, parallel universe stories. Like His Dark Materials, for instance. Uses in the world, the parallel universe of that world, you have airships instead of airplanes. And so that's that's how I ended up being interested in airships. Getting my photograph of the sent to me by a dear friend of mine, dear loved one, of the construction of the USS Shenandoah, and my book from 1945, Why Is America No Rigid Airships, where the former president of Goodyear was advocating for further airship development. So before I was talking about these books I used to get from the library about airships and ballooning and lighter-than-air technology. And I pointed out at the beginning of this little lecture lesson thing that one of the books in particular, The Aeronauts by L.T.C. Rault, I took that book out from the library at my college. And I was like, oh great, a book about ballooning, and I read it, and for some reason that name there did not, ring a bell. And it was only, in the last, about a month ago, when I was planning this, and I found, let me pull up that photo of all those books I read back in college. And I really think I was the only person to actually take out a lot of these books, frankly, but I look at this, I'm like, wait, L.T.C. Rault? And I have to think for a second, I'm like, wait, I know that name. That's the same L.T.C. Rault of railway adventure fame. So L.T.C. Rault was he was an enthusiast. He was kind of a historian of different technology. He was also very important the sort of historical preservation movement in the 20th century in Great Britain, and he was a key figure in the preservation of the Talyllyn Railway in northern Wales, which is the Talyllyn Railway was basically the first railway in the world to be preserved and run by volunteers who were just running it for the sake of running it instead of to actually run a business, a transportation business of some kind, whether it was people or passengers or freight. They were just preserving the railway and the locomotives and the equipment for historical sake. Railway Adventure is actually cited in at least one. Yeah, I mean the odds were pretty high. It's just that what I found interesting was the fact that I got the book The Aeronauts without paying attention to the fact that, LTC Raleigh, he's the guy who wrote Railway Adventure and helped preserve the Talyllyn Railway. So Railway Adventure, several stories, real life incidents that were written about in Railway Adventure were used as the basis for several of the Railway series stories, these being the source material for Thomas the Tank Engine. These books started coming out in 1945, and these are some of the original books written by Reverend Audrey. Now, these books here are actually from my personal collection. I purchased these from a bookshop, used goods, like a thrift shop, on the Bluebell Railway when I visited in England. These books are not very common, they're pretty rare actually in the US in terms of finding them in bookstores and stuff. And these are prints that are from I think the 60s and 70s of these books. And these are all books that happen to be about the narrow gauge railway, which and the Talyllyn Railway, which was Railway Adventure was written about, and which who LTC Ralt helped preserve that railway, was a 2-foot 3-inch gauge railway. Now, the interesting thing is, Reverend Audrey also was helped volunteer on the Talyllyn Railway, and he used some of his experiences on the railway as well as some stories from Railway Adventure as the basis for some of his Thomas stories. So when he decided he wanted to incorporate a railway on the island of Sodor based on the Talyllyn Railway, he invented what was called the Skarloey Railway, and so if you see here, the engine on the cover of Railway Adventure is locomotive number 1 Talyllyn, built in 1865. So he made his own engine called Skarloey. It was of the same type. It's the same type of engine, and Skarloey was also built in 1865. And actually, in that book, they're very old engines. They're actually illustrations of in the Thomas universe, like the real world actually still exists. And the lore is that a Talyllyn and Skarloey were built at the same time in the same workshop, and you actually see there are actually illustrations that are set on the Talyllyn Railway, and the engines don't have faces. Engines that aren't from the island of Sodor are depicted in the universe as not having faces. Only engines from Sodor have faces. So there's this interesting thing where there's several characters and several moments of engine characters with faces interacting with realistic locomotives that don't have faces, which kind of happened in the show in one instance, but not really. Now, if you look at this photograph from the Talyllyn Railway, and more recently, the real-life locomotive Talyllyn was actually painted red, which was the original, how the engine was painted in real life originally. So now the real-life locomotive looks exactly like the illustrations, and it's crazy if you think. I think the illustration from Four Little Engines on the right was from sometime in the 50s, but then, it was sometime in the 50s. Meanwhile, the photograph on the left was taken, within the last several years, more than 50 years later. So the point of all that was each engine on the real-life Talclin Railway has a parallel on the Skarloey Railway in Sodor. So, and I'm gonna tie this back. I'm gonna tie this up in a second, but so here we've got the real-life locomotive on the Talclin Railway, Edward Thomas. It was based on a personality from the history of the Talclin Railway. Reverend Audrey invented a character who was involved with the manager of the railway, I believe, was Mr. Peter Sam. So they made an engine based on him. Here's his model from season 4 of the Thomas the Tank Engine television series. And what's interesting to note here is that the scale model for filming the live-action animation television series is actually dirtier and more weathered and worn than the real-life engine. So I'm gonna tie this back into. So, like I said, every engine on the Talclin Railway has a fictional counterpart on the island of Sodor, and so locomotive number 7 on the Talclin Railway is Tom Ralt, who was named after LTC Ralt. And so, if there's an engine on the Talclin Railway that's named after a personality, there has to be an equivalent on the island of Sodor. So Tom Ralt and the engine named after him, their equivalent on the island of Sodor is a man named Ivo Hugh, and this is the engine named after him. So yes, so that's how we got from the books I was looking at to learn more about rigid airships, and somehow it tied back to Thomas the Tank Engine. So somehow everything's with me. It's always a certain number of degrees of separation to somehow get back to Thomas. That's everything I have planned to say. I know I've been somewhat kind of not really responding to chat in preparation for editing this together for YouTube. I'm not going to watch the rest of the video because there's really nothing else I have to comment on. I'm not here to show the video. I was here to comment on the specific things there were to comment on in the spirit of fair use. So later we'll have a edited video of this down on YouTube. Is there anyone who's still in chat? And thank you everyone who's used to me for my video game content to do this long history lesson with me, which actually took nearly 2 hours, believe it or not. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, they could ask it as I go back to. No, normally I would have been in bed at least an hour ago, if not 2 hours ago. But we can just get rid of. Let's change the stream. I'm gonna change back to retro. Yeah, change back to retro. And play a little more Game & Watch Gallery 4. Okay. I usually wake up between 6:45 and 7:30. If 8 or 9 is really late for me, and that's even without a. But sometimes I also sleep for like 4 or 4.5 hours, get up and work or for an hour, and then go back to sleep for the rest of the night. And I do actually sometimes when you or Kyle or are streaming, I actually do. I just want to get rid of. Is this? No. Is this? No. Alright. So we're not going to play for too long. Let's set the timer. Yeah, let's play for another 20 minutes and then I'll call it there. My Wii U went to sleep. We have to wake it back up. Thanks, everyone. If anyone has any questions about my interest in airships or anything about the history we discussed, Now you can go ahead and ask, and I don't mind at all. I will be later on. Let's see what we if we unlocked anything. Mario Circus. What's this? This corner has detailed info and hints about the games, and the info you've seen in game will stay here. Sure to check it anytime. Fire rules. Okay. Messages. Autosave. Press start during the save and turn off the power. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, but if anything has anything they'd like to ask, and I'm not begging for responses, but I just, in particular, if anyone hopped on specifically for this stream, or just wants to ask anything, you could ask while it's fresh and relevant, and if it's interesting enough, maybe I'll edit it into the video. Let's stick with the 2 games that we played so far. And we'll go back to, my next stream is gonna be Friday. No, excuse me. It's gonna be... Actually, when is my next stream? Okay, my next stream's gonna be Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and I'll be playing... it'll be a double feature. I'll be playing Twin Bee, and I'll be playing Fantasy Zone. So I'll be playing the 2 famous example of the cute-em-up genre, as it's called. I've been interested in both games for a long time. I've played the Master System version of Fantasy Zone. I only played about a half hour of that. I've watched history videos about Fantasy Zone, and my history and passion were inspiring. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad I could do that for you. Yeah, so the 2 cute-em-ups, I've watched the history of the series, but I never really gave the games much time. On Tuesday, and I do believe that was... Yes, it's Tuesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So on Tuesday, we'll be playing both Twin Bee and Fantasy Zone. I have to make sure I don't say Phantasy Star, which is my habit of doing. Both of those games are kind of really endearing, and they're cute-em-ups, so lots of cutesy aesthetics, pastel colors, smiling flowers and trees, all while you're playing as aircraft shooting enemies and avoiding obstacles. Actually, I guess I can make... No... I guess I can make this go away now. Where is... Yeah, there we go. I'll try it again with a little more focus this time. Then we'll try the modern version. Again. And, what is it that I was... Yeah, I was about... Yeah, so next stream, Tuesday, 1 Eastern Standard Time, we're playing Fantasy Star 2nd. And first, we'll be playing Twin Bee. Basically, Twin Bee is a vertical shooter, and nearly always a vertical shooter, and Fantasy Zone is always a horizontal shooter. I played the Master System version of Fantasy Zone before, but I'm going to be playing the arcade versions of both Twin Bee and Fantasy Zone via the Switch, which I look forward to tremendously. You might be familiar with Twin Bee. It was one of the Famicom Twin Bee games was localized in North America as Stinger, and I will be later comparing the Master System version of Fantasy Zone to Stinger. And I know Kalaka Boy, one of my regulars in chat, is particularly excited for me to play Stinger. I've never really even played Stinger before. And Stinger is an interesting entry in the Twin Bee series, because I believe Stinger is the only game in the Twin Bee series to have horizontal scrolling sections as well as vertical scrolling sections. And the cute thing about both Fantasy Zone and Twin Bee is that in both versions, well, I think in Twin Bee, the ships are kind of alive, like they have like arms and legs, and I think they wear boxing gloves. But they're piloted by people. I don't think the ships themselves are alive. In Fantasy Zone, the actual lore of Fantasy Zone is that the ships are actually like a living race of spaceships that have arms and legs. And like when these little ships travel into space, they actually Azurest act like they're jumping from the Hindenburg. How appropriate. My mind did not go there, but I've known you long enough that that humor is a little dark, but I guess suited to the stream. Okay, once we void out on this one, we're gonna skip to the modern version of this game. So this is how this would have played on the original. I got a lot of points there. Got a lot of. So that's how it would have played on the original 1980s electronic handheld game, and this is the modern reimagining of the game. So now we have Mario and Luigi. We have some snazzy background music. Oh no! Let's just. That was embarrassing. We already dropped one. Let's play this once, and then I'll play the other game we played today. There are at least 2 other games, and I think others that were actually and there were other games that you can unlock if you play enough of these games. But we'll save those for future streams. So next week, only one stream next week. It'll be Fantasy. It'll be Twin Bee and Fantasy Zone. I'll play Twin Bee first because Twin Bee came out first, so I'll play them both in chronological order. Compare the two seminal cute 'em ups side by side. Both Twin Bee and Fantasy Zone originate in the 1980s arcade, so I'll be playing the arcade versions of both those games. Then the week after that, I will be playing. I intend to play. I'll have to be playing on my original Wii for the first time. We'll see how that works out technically, because I have a converter I'll use to plug my original Wii into my my Elgato capture card. So I'll have to do some testing within the next couple of weeks to make sure I can do this properly as I intend. But we'll be playing the Master System version of Fantasy Zone, and the NES version of Twin Bee, which in North America is known as Stinger. So next week we're gonna be playing the arcade. We're gonna be playing the arcade versions of Twin Bee and Fantasy Zone. Then the week after next will be one stream also, and we'll be playing the home console versions of those games and comparing those. So it'll be a lot of fun. And then so the week after next, so it'll probably be kind of late into March, if not well into April, or early into April, we'll be going back to Paper Mario and playing Paper Mario through. We played through the first half of Paper Mario, and we'll be playing through the second half. And in the second half of Paper Mario, I think the second half will go through a lot longer than the first half, because I've learned how to pace myself so I can stream longer, and Paper Mario streams have generally been 2 or 2.5 hours. Now that I'm reliably doing 4 hours of gameplay per stream, I'll be able to get through the game a lot quicker. Now the fun thing about the Paper Mario stream is that I'm doing what I call the Wheel of Fate challenge, and where every time Mario levels up, I spin a wheel to decide every time Mario levels up in Paper Mario, if you're unfamiliar with it, one of Mario's 3 statistics can be increased, and you get to choose which stat will be increased, and depending on which stats are increased, it really shakes up the strategy and the approach to battle, and what kind of equipment and magic and abilities Mario can use throughout the adventure. So, randomizing that by spinning a wheel each time Mario levels up has added a level of randomization, and me having to improvise my strategy and my abilities output that I assign to Mario throughout the adventure. Now, the first half of the game I am familiar with. but the second half, right up to where I started playing, is actually beyond where I've ever played. So I'm actually... Oops. That's a third man out. And there, I don't know if you saw before, Kyle, but there's a cool quick save where if you like hold start and turn the game off, and if you turn the game back on later, it instantly starts from where you were at. So it really kind of captures the instant play, instant put down nature of the original Game & Watch handhelds. And it would be a fantastic game to have on Game Boy Micro, especially back when I was in New York City, and visiting New York City a lot, and I didn't want to carry my 3DS, and I didn't want to have pants with large, super big pockets. So I had a Game Boy Micro, nice pocket-sized system. I was buying a few games like Pokemon Pinball, and Pokemon Pinball, Pokemon Pinball I got for work when I was working at a dollar store, because I only had a 10-minute break, and from where I had to clock out from my break from, and the break room were on opposite sides of the building, so it was more like an 8-minute break if I was being generous, because I had to clock out, go all the way back to the break room, or what they jokingly call the break room, and then I'd have to go all the way back to the oh gosh, this game is very unforgiving, and I keep forgetting the physics on this. And so I'd have to go back all the way up to the front, because I had to clock out using the cash registers, which was a nightmare. Yeah, so... Yeah, this is when I was working at the dollar store, and so that's when I started using my Game Boy Micro more. That's when I got Pokemon Pinball, and then later on, after I left the dollar store, when I was still, doing, lots of trips into the city where I just wanted to be able to move around easily and not have to worry about lugging around a 3DS, which I loved, especially in Manhattan. And you got a lot of Street Pass hits out in the wild. I have hundreds and hundreds of Street Pass hits. I mean, there's a reason everything in that store was $1, because they didn't want to treat the employees right. But I still shop at that dollar store chain. The dollar store chain. It was only a 10-minute break, but to be fair, it was only 3 to 4 hour shifts. Only a couple of times did I actually work a full shift that would warrant a proper lunch break. So it wasn't as bad. But that was my first retail job, so 4 hours with it being my first retail job ever did seem a lot longer and excruciating of a 4 hours than it would be once, when I, went on to work at a warehouse club. I was used to 4 hour shifts, and I'd get 2 15-minute breaks and a half-hour break. And so it was a lot more forgiving. By the time, and the dollar store was, the warehouse club was only, 5 minutes from my house, to the point where I could run, one day, I forgot my 3DS at home. I literally ran home on foot during my half-hour lunch break. I ran home on foot to get my 3DS, ran back to the warehouse club, and I still had, 15 minutes to play 3DS before, if I had a car at that time, I could have driven home for my half-hour lunch break, had 20 minutes to spend at home, and then just spent 5 minutes driving to home and 5 minutes driving back. Actually, driving, I had a Razor scooter, and it was like a passenger, what they call a passenger Razor scooter, where it was big wheels that absorbed the shock. And it was a nice Razor scooter. And I actually went home often. I was a closer, so I often went home after dark. So I had a flashlight mount and a mount for my phone. It was the most hooked up Razor scooter, and a bell to warn passengers. To warn pedestrians. I had the most hooked up Razor scooter you had ever seen. It was so ridiculously cool. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to brake properly at first, so I ended up grinding the wheels down on the back wheel to brake. And the cool thing about using the Razor scooter was that the trip was, like, half of it was pretty much downhill. So either way, like, half of the trip was just me coasting. It was really cool. Yeah, so I had the most hooked up Razor scooter you ever saw, and it was so cool because I'd get to work. I'd fold up, it was a Razor scooter, so you could fold it up. So I'd fold up this Razor scooter, and I'd put it behind the Coke machine in the break room, which is an employees-only area, so I don't have to worry about, like, other, like... And plus, at a store like a warehouse club, there's someone at the door checking the receipts, and everyone knows what my scooter looks like, so there's no way that a co-worker could have stolen the scooter without the person at the door being like, what are you doing with H's scooter? Like, you know what I mean? Oh no, now this version is much more forgiving, and with the modern versions, they add some elements where they, sort of, decomplicate a lot of the... Now, what I love, they turn the cement factory, which is sort of playing in with some of the industrial themes of, like, original Donkey Kong. Originally, Mario was meant to, or Jumpman was meant to be a carpenter. Then there was Wrecking Crew, where he's, you know, demolishing a building with sledgehammers and bombs. And then there's Mario's Cement Factory, obviously what we're playing right here. And then there was Mario Brothers on Game & Watch, in which Mario and Luigi were working in a packaging warehouse. They were like working in a warehouse packaging goods. So we have this more comfy, a little more maybe child-friendly, a little more comfy of a theme here of this this confectionery factory that Mario and Luigi are working in. And rather than the cement factory theme. But if you notice, I love how Yoshi is eating the cookies, whereas Toad is actually packaging them up. I think Toad is sleeping on the job down there, but he wakes up when you need him to actually do the work, so bless him. We'll let him sleep on the job. I would have been asleep a couple hours myself already, but just for you guys. Most of my... when I set the time that I'd be playing, I didn't plan for it to be exactly midnight Eastern Standard Time. Hey, Bubbly Bugbear, I feel like I've been in your streams before. Have you been in my streams before? I feel like, or who found who first? Did you find me first? Did I find you first? I forgot how that went. I know I definitely know of you, and I've definitely seen you around. Did I remember first? Did I meet you in Kyle's stream? You popped in on a couple? All right. I mean, it's always the viewer's business of whether or not to make themselves known. And so, me personally, how I'm gonna run it, if I get to have a larger number of viewers in the future, I'm happy with the number of viewers I have right now. It could stay like this forever, and I'm perfectly fine. But if I get to become a slightly larger streamer, I might consider maybe turning notifications off if I become significantly bigger, just because I don't want to, you know, draw attention to lurkers. I don't want to say, like, oh, thank you, and then pressure someone to, you know, to participate, you know, to say hi in chat if they were just, you know, sweeping the floor or, you know, assembling a model Gundam or something like that, you know? Yeah, I don't even look in my, I don't even use my stream manager to look at who's who's in chat, because everyone watching gets listed as being in chat. I don't even like doing that so much, because sometimes I'll see a relatively, well, a significantly well-known person in my list, and I don't want to, like, call them out. I just want to respect their privacy. I don't want to, like, name drop, like, oh, oh, so-and-so was in chat, how you doing? You know what I mean? I want to respect their privacy. Now, I used to do, my first Gunpla model was the Wing Zero Custom. No, not Wing Zero Custom. I never built Wing Zero Custom. I just built Wing Zero. Alright, so time is up. I'm gonna go ahead. Let's play through the rest of this game here. Actually, it happened to run out. It is noon, a minute past noon. Let's go ahead and call it. Alright. So next stream is going to be on. Excuse me. Did I not? Is the 16th a Thursday? The 16th is a Tuesday. I thought I already updated this. I did not. Let me update this. I have to wait for the Streamlabs to catch up with my ambition. So Tuesday, on the 16th at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, I will be going to be a double feature. At least 2 hours of Twin Bee and at least 2 hours of Fantasy Zone. Probably more likely 2 hours of Twin Bee, 10-minute break, than 2 hours of Fantasy Zone. 4.25 hours. Well, actually 4 hours because I was on my hold screen for about 50 minutes. So basically 4 hours of content. Yeah, I'll be playing both of those on the Nintendo Switch, so not technically Virtual Console, but I will be playing the arcade editions of those games. The Twin Bee is going to be played via Arcade Archives, and Sega just released Fantasy Zone as its own standalone title on the Switch, not part of any particular collection. Now, let's see. I'm going to, yeah, so that's what you could look forward to on, for next Tuesday. I usually do one stream a week for anyone who's new to this. If you came in during the Airship lesson part of the stream, pretty much, yeah, pretty much you can, normally I interact with chat a lot more, but I didn't really interact with chat so much because I wanted to focus on the material I was delivering. I was answering things that chat was saying, but I wasn't acknowledging chat much. I turned my alerts off because I wanted to edit that together into a YouTube video that'll be on my YouTube channel, which is GGuru1. If you look there, that's a playlist that's on my YouTube channel of my existing VODs. And I'll edit down the airship portion lesson so that I can have a video just about the airship part. It's more streamlined without me hemming and hawing and so much. So I'm gonna send you over to Pete, who's streaming right now. He's streaming, I think, Ghosts and Goblins. It's not often. Often of the people I know, I don't have a chance to raid. So, but this time I do, so I'll send you over to Pete in about 8 seconds. So thank you all for joining me. This was a stream I spent about basically 2 full days doing research and preparation for. Could have done it much easier with a PowerPoint, but I ended up doing it directly via OBS. So I'll see you next time. Thank you so much, even more so than usual, for watching, and I'll see some of you next Tuesday. And if you can't make it to that, enjoy the VOD.